For most college football programs, 3 national championships might represent a lasting badge of honor. For the University of Oklahoma, 3 was simply a good start. In 1973, a longtime assistant and mastermind of the Wishbone offense was hired as the 17th head coach at Oklahoma. His name, Barry Switzer. He unleashed a talented and lethal attack that resulted in 3 more titles and some of the most entertaining teams ever to step on the field. Hi, I'm Spencer Tillman, a Tulsa native and member of Oklahoma's 6th national championship team. As a child, I looked up to Sooner greats Joe Washington, Greg Pruitt, and Billy Sims. These legends helped carry the legacy of winning established by Billy Vessels, Buddy Burris, and Claude Reeds. The storied tradition of Sooner football dates back to the late 1800s, when a land known as Indian Territory began to make a name for itself. That name was Oklahoma. Nearly 65 years had passed since Jack Hart suggested the idea of a football team for the State University. A casual conversation sparked a phenomena that unified the state and shocked the nation. Oklahomans tasted the sweetness of success as Bud Wilkinson led his squad to a record 47 straight victories and firmly perched the Oklahoma football program as the nation's elite. Wilkinson had led his team to unprecedented heights, but a rocky relationship with the Board of Regents left the program with an uncertain future and forced his resignation as athletic director. After Wilkinson's initial endorsement of longtime assistant Gomer Jones, it was the incredible fan-supported Oklahoma that pushed the Board of Regents to name Jones the next head football coach and athletic director.
I appreciate more than I can say what Buddy Wilkinson's strong endorsement of me. Also the President's support, the Athletic Council, and the faculty of the Oklahoma University. The people of the Oklahoma stood behind me loyally, and I'm very grateful for their support.
After years as Wilkinson's head assistant, fans expected the same success they had witnessed at Owen Field for the past half-century.
You got any thoughts about a new line coach?
No. We have a fine line coach here in Drake Keith, and I imagine he will take over as line coach. With the new substitution rule, we'll probably change our way of coaching, and that we'll have offensive coaches and defensive coaches, and I will try to supervise both phases of the game.
As Oklahoma struggled to break even, its rival in the North was looking for its first undefeated season since 1915. Bob Devaney's Nebraska Cornhuskers led the nation in total defense and looked to extend their 16-game winning streak with a victory against Oklahoma. The 17-7 victory in Norman would be the highlight of Jones' first season and the beginning of a new tradition at Owen Field, the Sooner Schooner. Oklahoma rallied to earn an invitation to the Gator Bowl against Florida State, but the Fred Biletnikoff-led Seminoles handed Oklahoma a 36-19 loss to cap a disappointing season. The nightmare of 1964 extended beyond the football field as the United States sent more than 200,000 troops to South Vietnam. Meanwhile, Coach Jones was in a battle of his own as Oklahoma lost its first 3 games by a combined score of 42-9. The offensive deficiencies were too much to overcome, and the pressure mounted heavily as the 3-7 season came to a close. Only 2 days had passed since a loss to Oklahoma State when Gomer gracefully stepped down as head coach. Although Gomer Jones retained the position of athletic director, it was OU President George Lynn Cross who took the reins of the football program, just as he had done in 1946, with the hiring of Jim Tatum and Bud Wilkinson.
Frank Cush was the head coach at Arizona State. I was an assistant, and Frank Broyles was the head coach at Arkansas, and Jim was an assistant.
Of course, Arkansas was recruiting me pretty heavily. At that time, Jim McKenzie was assistant head coach, and Frank Broyles was the head coach. And so Coach McKenzie was recruiting me pretty hard. He said, you need to come to Arkansas because they just won a national championship.
They used to have an all-star game in Tempe. It was called the Copper Bowl. And so those 2 head coaches were supposed to coach that all-star game, but Jim and I ended up coaching the game while those guys played golf.
But I kept telling Coach McKenzie, it's my dream to go to Oklahoma. I'm an Oklahoma kid. I want to play at Oklahoma. And he kept saying to me, he said, Steve, he said, you need to come to Arkansas because there's probably going to be a coaching change at Oklahoma.
it was time for a change, and that's why the changes were made, because Dr. Cross thought it was time to make a change.
Coach Jones here, he resigned, and Coach McKenzie was selected as head coach here at Oklahoma.
And a call comes in for Jim McKenzie, and he takes it in Frank's bedroom, and he comes out, and I'm looking at him. He says, "I've just been offered the Oklahoma job." So we congratulate him. He says, "You going with me?" And I said, "You bet." He went January the 1st after the bowl game. I arrived 2 days later.
When Jim was named head coach at the University of Oklahoma, well, he called me and asked me to come join his staff.
So I'll never forget the phone call from him. He called me and he said, "Hey, forget all that stuff I've been telling you about Arkansas. You need to follow your dreams and come to Oklahoma."
Recruiting in Oklahoma now for the University of Arkansas for the past 4 years. I've already spent 3 weeks of their time over there this year. I just hope I haven't done too good a job.
The resurgence of Oklahoma football began immediately as Coach McKenzie brought in one of the greatest coaching staffs in history with Chuck Fairbanks, Pat James, Homer Rice, Galen Hall, Larry Lacewell, and Barry Switzer.
Probably one of the greatest staffs of all time in any college program. If you look what happened to those coaches, different head coaches, and the successes they've had. So I felt fortunate to have the opportunity to play for these coaches.
First thing that Jim McKenzie and his staff did was implement an off-season program second to none, something that Oklahoma had not really seen to that extent in the past. It was an extremely tough off-season program, and what it did, it really elevated the bar as far as anyone that wanted to make the commitment to play football at OU. As a group, we lost like 1,400 pounds in that off-season program before, Jim McKenzie's first year in 1966.
The off-season conditioning paid off as Oklahoma jumped out of the gate in 1966 with victories over Oregon and Iowa State. The annual matchup with Texas awaited the Sooners in the 3rd week of the season, and Sooner fans were desperate for a win.
Oklahoma hadn't beaten Texas in 8 years. Gomer lost to him twice, and Bud hadn't won in 6 years. So it was an 8-year span. You got to say that was the reason why there was a change.
The rapid success of the Sooners was backed by McKenzie's implementation of a series of principles known as the winning edge. The 20 rules were believed to be the keys to success for any football team. It had been 9 seasons since Oklahoma walked out of the Cotton Bowl victorious during Darrell Royal's first year as head coach in Austin. Both teams battled throughout the day, but it was 4 field goals by Mike Vachon that highlighted the importance of the winning edge. Only Benny Owen had defeated Texas in his first season as head coach, and Coach McKenzie was on a rapid pace to Oklahoma's Coaching Hall of Fame.
We're 4-0. Notre Dame, who's coming to Norman the next week, is 4-0. And we don't really know how good we are, but we're undefeated, and everybody thinks Oklahoma's back. So we go into that ball game thinking that we got a chance against Notre Dame. And before the game starts, our whole team is out on the sideline, and Notre Dame's not out there yet. They hadn't left the dressing room. And we're kind of punching one another, that, hey, they're scared of us. Well, they're scared of us. We're looking around, and all of a sudden the ground starts trembling. The heck is this? We look down there where the visitors' ramp is, and here they come. Swear to God, that field just tilted when they came out on the field, and they beat us 38-0 that day, and I think every football player that played for Notre Dame went on and played in the pros.
Making his return to Norman, Oklahoma legend Bud Wilkinson stepped into the broadcast booth for ABC's nationally televised coverage of the 1966 Nebraska game.
Well, I remember that game pretty well. I think we were 10-0. Nebraska was going in that game.
We put a tremendous emphasis on being able to stop the running game, and we gave them an unbelievable burden of coverage. They had no help whatsoever the whole game, and we just had more guys than they could block up there, and they never had the ability to beat us.
We had a wingback named Eddie Hinton that caught some key passes.
Bobby Stevenson made an interception in that game that allowed us to be in position to win it with a field goal.
It really hurt. We were on the way to possibly winning a national championship if we got by Oklahoma.
We were 6-3 at that point, going into Oklahoma State for our final game. They're ahead late in the ball game, and we're making a long drive, and we get inside the 5, and it's 1st and goal, and we're down 1 point. and late in the ball game, and I'm looking at the sideline for the signal, and it comes in, tailback off tackle. So give the ball a shot, and he hits up in there for no gain. Second and goal. I look over the sideline and get the play, and it's tailback off tackle. Hand it off to Shots, and no gain. Third and goal. I look over the sideline, tailback off tackle. Hand it off to Shots, no gain. Fourth and goal, we're going for it. And I look over the sideline, here comes the play, tailback off tackle. And I'm thinking, this is nuts, And I step in the huddle and I call that play. And I go up the line of scrimmage, and I'm thinking, I'm going to make a great fake to Shots, and I'm going to put that ball on my hip. And I'm literally going to walk around the end for a 2-yard touchdown run. 3 times it didn't work. This time, I'm just going to make a great fake. Well, I make the fake to Shots, and I start around the end, and I see this orange jersey right in my face, and I get tackled for a loss. And had I hand that ball off to Shots, he had run through the end zone. And, of course, they had an out charge, and I'm laying on the ground, and Jim McKenzie, I could hear him from the sideline hollering at me, and I'm thinking, I don't want to go back over there, because Jim McKenzie's tough, And so finally, I get up and I go back over their sideline. He grabs me. He said, "Warmack, are you trying to be the hero? What's wrong with you?" I said, "Coach, I'm just trying to score. I didn't care who scored the touchdown. I just wanted to score." Of course, we lost the ball game. We ended up 6-4, but we beat Texas, Jim McKenzie's year, and we beat Nebraska. 2 great wins against 2 pretty good football programs. And that kind of set our program for the next year, the breakout year for 1967. And unfortunately, Jim McKenzie was not around to enjoy any of that.
You look a little younger 11 weeks ago, Coach, about 3 years younger.
I don't know. I also noticed I look a little thinner, Howard.
And he'd been on a recruiting trip to talk to Monty Johnson, who later played safety and was a captain during my time there. Made that trip. He came home that night and had a massive heart attack.
Phone rings late at night, and Kay answers the phone. She says, "It's for you, it's Ken Rollinson." And she had a serious look on her face, and because I could hear her have a few comments with Ken, and Ken says, "Jim McKenzie is dead. He just passed away of a heart attack." We drove immediately to Sue McKenzie's home. Of course, we spent the rest of the night there.
It was a truly shock to all of us that this young, vibrant, great football mind and great coach would die at such an early age because he had such a great future ahead of him. And this guy would be, I think if you talk to Coach Switzer or Coach Fairbanks, he'd be one of the great coaches.
I owe everything to him. I was undersized, but I had this, and I had the ability, plus I had this, and that's how he made me what I was.
And of course, after his death, they selected Chuck Fairbanks to be the head coach in '67.
Pat James and I were pallbearers, and we flew to Gary, Indiana, where the funeral was for Jim. Before we left, Dr. Cross talked to me briefly, and I think he also talked to Pat James. Gomer Jones was our athletic director at that time. He told me when we got on the plane that Dr. Cross was going to name me as the new head coach at OU.
It was tough, I know that, but it was just something that it happened, and you just keep moving on.
Chuck inherited Jim's staff, great staff. Didn't change the offense, didn't change the defense. Pretty much everything stayed the same, so the continuity was there. But Chuck was a tough hombre. He had that old squint eye, and he wouldn't say very much. There was a lot of intimidation there, coaching by intimidation. And if you wanted to play, you really had to step up and do what you were told to do. And Jim McKenzie's staff and Chuck Fairbanks' staff were tough.
An inspired Oklahoma team came out of the tunnel in the first 2 games of the season, rolling over Washington State and Maryland by a combined score of 56-0. 2 weeks separated the Sooners from their next game in the Cotton Bowl with a frustrated Texas team that had already lost its first 2 games of 1967. The game was a Cotton Bowl classic as the hearts of Oklahoma fans again rested on the foot of kicker Mike Vachon.
The year before, we had a kicker named Mike Vachon who kicked 4 field goals to beat Texas, 67, and we ran up and down the field on Texas. We were by far the best team. But we had the same kicker, Mike Vachon, and he missed 4 field goals, the last from about the 26-yard line. So we should have beat Texas that year, but it was ironic that Mike Vachon kicks 4 in 66 and he misses 4 in 67.
Kansas game my sophomore season was the surprise season.
We were picked 4th in our conference preseason.
We go from 6-4 and we're leading the Big 8 conference.
In the days leading up to the Kansas game, the representatives, they were coming around, you know, and Dr. Cross would come over after practice like he did every day or during practice, and he'd say, well, Coach, the Sugar Bowl people came by today, and I said, no, sir, Dr. Cross. I said, our guys want to play, we want to go to the Orange Bowl.
It was the game where they bought all the oranges, because if we won the game, we would go to the Orange Bowl.
Our guys want to play Tennessee and the Orange Bowl. We need to stay home if we don't beat Kansas. Oh, no, he said that just down the road we can go down to Dallas.
You know, I remember getting in the huddle and Warmack saying something about, you know, him going deep. This is it. And because we were running out of time, and they let Steve get behind him.
Back to pass, throws deep for Zabel in the end zone.
And of course he made a perfect throw, beautiful catch, and then the whole stadium erupted.
The fans rained oranges on the field and got us a unsportsmanlike penalty for having they had to clear all the oranges off the field. There was one person on the bench, and it was Dr. Cross. We had that pipe in his mouth, and he was giving us the cheer like that. It's a great picture of an exciting moment.
So we came from behind. It was hard fought. We were lucky to have won. I mean, it could have gone either way, but Kansas had the lead the entire game.
The Big 8 title was to carry the Sooners to Miami, Florida, the Orange Bowl, and Tennessee.
We were having trouble stopping Tennessee.
Charlie Fulton, he got some good blocks at the line of scrimmage, but goes forward, picks up 11 yards. But look back upfield, it's Granville Liggins down.
And Steve Barrett was our safety, and Steve had gotten hurt. So the 2 best defensive players were out of the game. Owens had never had a losing down in his career. So we gave it to Steve Owens, and we didn't make it.
And he does not make it. Tennessee takes over at the Oklahoma 43-yard line.
So then they had a short distance to go to get in position to make a field goal. But in Liggins' absence, Larry Crutchmer, who was a substitute for Liggins, hadn't played hardly at all year long, made 2 or 3 great plays to stop Tennessee and to force the kick.
The ball is down. The kick is in the air. It's no good, and Oklahoma wins 26-24. The bench is called the Orange Bowl Victory Stone.
That year, the national champion was voted on before the bowl games were played. And Tennessee was named before we played them, and then we won the game.
University of Oklahoma quarterback Bob Womack from Ada, Oklahoma, being presented with the trophy as the most outstanding player in this 34th annual Orange Bowl Classic.
That's the last year that happened.
It had only been 10 years since Prentice Gaught broke the color barrier by becoming the first African-American letter winner at Oklahoma in any sport. By 1968, as racial tensions still flared across the country, student athletes on campus began to rally behind Dr. King's assassination. After completing one of its best seasons in a decade, a confident Oklahoma team suited up for the 1968 season.
We were coming off a Big 8 championship, and we were loaded. Our defense was good, but our offense was so talented that year. We started out in 68. We opened with Notre Dame. It was a tough game playing Notre Dame there. They had a great team. And in Texas, you know, we stumbled. In Colorado, we stumbled. And all of a sudden, in 68, we caught on fire, man. We started playing great football.
The spark began with number 36, a punishing runner from Miami, Oklahoma, Steve Owens carried the Sooner squad through the 1968 season, rushing for a then school record 1,649 yards and 21 touchdowns in his junior season. Owens punished defenses with his hard-nosed blue-collar work ethic that his family became known for.
My dad worked hard. He was driving a truck back and forth to Dallas, 3 times a week, and I just think it's just kind of the way we grew up.
His recovery ability was phenomenal. We would play on Saturday, and he would carry the ball time after time after time, and we always used to make the guys come back early Sunday morning. I would take him out in the stadium, and we would run and run and run. He'd be like a newborn colt out there frisky and playing touch football, and never seemed to have any wear and tear on him.
I think it really comes from my dad, pretty much, and my mother. My mother was a basketball player in high school and stuff, so she was an athlete.
He had great vision. He was patient. He allowed things to happen, and he was powerful. He's a powerful man. But the biggest thing he had was the competitive heart and spirit inside.
O.J. Simpson won the Heisman in '68, and he just so happened to be watching a Nebraska game. I scored 5 touchdowns that day, and we beat 47-0. He called me from New York City, and he said, "You keep playing like you played against Nebraska, you'll win the Heisman."
Owens had eclipsed 100 yards in the final 9 games of 1968, and heading into his senior season, was on pace to rewrite the record books. Stunned fans in Madison, Wisconsin watched as Owens gained 189 yards and a 48-21 Oklahoma victory. After stepping over Pittsburgh the following week, the Sooners seemed to be on pace for yet another standout season behind their senior leader. Coach Fairbanks' squad fell to Texas 27-17. And looked to Steve Owens to lead them to their first Big 8 win of the season against Colorado in Norman.
My senior year, we were playing the University of Colorado here in Norman, and I had not gained 100 yards, and I had had a 14 or 15 or 16 consecutive 100-yard games. And we already had the game won. It was the latter part of the game, and I think I had 80 yards rushing. There was 2 minutes left in the ball game. We could just run the clock out. Came back to the huddle and said, "Hey, let's just run the timeout, win the ball game. It's not important if I gain 100 yards or not." Well, Billy Elster, one of our offensive guards, looked up at me and he was really upset. He said, "Steve, it might not be important to you, but it's important to us." And I think those type things stick with me more than any kind of records. Just knowing that my teammates here wanted me to do well.
Owens' 100-yard rushing streak continued, notching 201 yards against Kansas, before seeing the Cornhuskers of Nebraska stop Owens short at 71 yards. Owens' accomplishments stretched for 18 games, and rumors began to spread across campus that he would become Oklahoma's next Heisman winner.
At that time, they just called you if you won. They didn't call you if you finished second. They were supposed to call us at 11 o'clock Oklahoma time. And so it was 11 o'clock, no call, 11:10, no call, 11:15. So we were going to play Oklahoma State that weekend. So I told my wife, I got to get to practice or get ready for practice, let's go. And so it was sort of crazy. I walked out and had the OU radio station right next to this room I was staying. And this kid out front yelled at me and said, "Hey, Steve, you just won the Heisman." That's how I initially found out. Then they had a telephone hookup in President Holloman's office. It was really surreal because it seemed like when we left the Union to go to the president's office that all the kids on campus had heard that I'd won the Heisman. It was like a movie set. I mean, people were yelling and screaming and you know, "Hey, Steve won the Heisman." It was quite a scene. When I got to the president's office, they had media and coaches and folks there, and I hadn't talked to the Heisman people at that point. I mean, I hadn't been told personally that I won the Heisman. So when I picked up the phone to talk to the Heisman people, it went click, okay? We lost connection again. Well, maybe they don't want to give it to me. So anyway, they called back, and we finally got a hookup and had a chance, and Mr. McAllister was head of the Heisman Downtown Athletic Club. Said he won the Heisman. We look forward to you coming to New York and accepting the Heisman.
A dichotomy split the campus as fans cheered Owens' historic season. They wondered how a team that had gone 17-5 over the past 2 seasons could have dropped to just 5-4 heading into a game against Oklahoma State.
I'd won the Heisman on Tuesday, and we were trying to practice and prepare to play Oklahoma State, who had a good football team. And the rumor started around campus, if we lost the game, they're going to fire the staff. And we had a team meeting and talked about how important it was for us to win this ball game. Certainly, we wanted to beat Oklahoma State, but the thing was, we wanted to make sure that we did everything we could to keep that coaching staff here, because we knew how special this coaching staff was and how great coaches we had. So we go to Stillwater, and it was a tough game.
I remember we took a drive off the goal line. We held them defensively about the 3-yard line, and they went 4th and down. We stopped them. We took a drive, and Steve carried about 7 consecutive downs, and we're at the 50-yard line, and Jack comes to the sideline. And I said, who in the hell called timeout? And Jack said, Steve did, Coach. He said he's tired. And I said, you go back in the huddle, and you tell him to saddle up. He's fixing to carry it 7 more times in a row probably. And I said, hey, he can rest when the season's over. We're not going to a bowl game. And he went back in there. He did carry about 8 or 9 times more. He hammered it in the end zone.
We won it 28-27, and I don't know if the rumors were true, but I like to think that we went in and won that game and hopefully did something to make sure that these coaches we had stayed here, because they said the rest is history. Think of the impact that would have happened on the history of OU football.
In '69, we weren't really very good compared to some of the other teams that we had, and Steve kind of carried us on his back.
Right after I won the Heisman, I got a call that they wanted to see me on the Johnny Carson show. They put me in what they call the green room, and I'm sitting there, and this guy comes in, he looks familiar, and I keep looking at him. It's Muhammad Ali. About 2 minutes later, here comes this guy that looks really familiar, and he played Moses on 10 Commandments. So I'm sitting next to Moses and Muhammad Ali, and an aide to Johnny Carson comes in and says, Mr. Owens, and I raised my hand. And she said, the President of the United States would like to talk to you. And I said, what? And Muhammad and Moses look at each other, and they're thinking, who is this guy? So I get up, and I thought it was a joke or something, but it was an aide to the President Nixon, and he wanted me and Barbara to fly to New York the next day and be his guests on Air Force One, fly to the Arkansas-Texas game, which was being played for the national championship. So I took the Heisman with me because I didn't have a way to get it back to Oklahoma, and so they checked the Heisman. I think it's the only time it's been strip searched, and it was pretty cool. And so President Nixon, he sent his guy out, and they wanted to see us, so we go to his office on Air Force One. And the Heisman folks would give me a pair of cufflinks to give to him as a gift from the Heisman. And so I presented those Heisman cufflinks to him, and he took off his cufflinks that he had. He gave them to me. I still have them. We got to spend 15, 20 minutes with the President of the United States on Air Force One. And what an incredible thing for a kid, from Miami, Oklahoma to experience. And so we flew to the game, and we had a chance to sit with President Nixon and George Bush and all these people for the game. And afterwards, I'll never forget this, I had 2 friends that come over from Norman to watch the game, and they had an old beat-up Chevy. And so we had to get back to Norman, so I had the Heisman, our suitcases, and I flew in on Air Force One and flew in on the President's helicopter. And after the game, we left town in an old beat-up Chevy. I said, it's a great country, coming back to Oklahoma.
The decade of the 60s had come to a close, with 4 different head coaches and only 3 conference championships. The accomplishments of the 50s were behind the program now, and so was another Heisman Trophy. The program looked to return to its glory years as news from the war traveled across the wire.
Bob Kalsu, senior offensive tackle from Del City, Oklahoma, was all Big 8 offensive team.
Bob Kalsu was the captain of the team. He was a no-nonsense 5th-year guy from Del City. I was a sophomore starter playing next to him, and so it just went with the territory.
He was my cadet colonel when I went through ROTC here, and I was a freshman, and I just had a chance. Bob was a junior, but he was the leader. He was the guy.
He had the most gregarious personality and the most affectionate laugh that anybody had, and because of his size and his intimidation, when he laughed and that big smile would come over his face, it would just give you a warm feeling in your heart.
Any time that Bob was a right offensive tackle that I had a chance, I was just praying that I'd have the chance to run behind him, because any time you ran behind Kalsu, there was a hole there. He was a great player.
He evaluated every block that I made, and particularly if I didn't deliver on a double team. I heard about it on the way back to the huddle. So they didn't need a coach on the sideline. I had one on the field telling me when I was underperforming, underachieving, not getting done what I should. But I had great respect for him.
When he went to Buffalo, he rose up pretty quick, and he started there. And I'm not sure if he was Rookie of the Year or what, but he had a great run with Buffalo before Uncle Sam called him. He could have gotten out of going to Vietnam, but he chose to stand up and do his duty, and he did.
Didn't surprise me that Bob left the Buffalo Bills and went to Vietnam and served his country, and unfortunately was killed in Vietnam.
He was in the artillery, and he just got moved closer and closer to the DMZ, and wrong spot at the wrong time. That was pretty much it, but he is a great American hero.
And he left behind great kids that I've had a chance, and we all have stayed close to, so, it's just tough.
Everybody that knew him is proud to have been a friend of his, and certainly for me to get to have played alongside of him for that great last season.
Just wish he'd stayed with us, because there's no telling, in life how many great things he would accomplish, but he left an impact on all of us.
Changes were in order for the Oklahoma program, and along with switching to artificial turf, Chuck implemented the Houston Veer offense against the wishes of his offensive coordinator.
When we first started, we were an I formation team because we had Ron Schatz, Steve Owens, that type of big, fast, great backs, carry the ball 30, 40, 50 times a game. But then those guys graduated, and we had young speed guys. We had Greg Pruitt and Joe Washington and Leon Crosswhite and Joe Wiley, and we had a great option quarterback in Jack Mildren.
Chuck, because of his influence with Bill Yeoman being at Houston, he wanted to put in an offense called the Houston Veer.
We tried to run the Veer option, which lends itself to more ability to throw passes because you had wide receivers on the field.
I've always believed in the running game, running the ball first. This was predicated a lot off the passing game. I said, Chuck, let's do what Texas is doing. Texas was the only one running the wishbone. We saw it, had to face it, we had to stop it. I looked at a lot of film of it. I sat in there with Larry Laceville and Pat James and talking about, hey, we ain't got enough people to stop this thing, And I'm studying and analyzing and recognizing the great potential of the offense. So I said to Chuck, you know what we ought to do is we ought to go to wishbone. But Chuck did not want to copy Texas, be the only two teams in the country. And I said, everybody copies everybody. John McKay started handing it to an O.J. Simpson in I formation. Then all of a sudden, there were a lot of I formation teams. There was I formation before O.J. running it out there. There's Texas Tech with Donnie Anderson. I said, don't worry about that being an influence. We're going to be able to recruit good players, and we can do well with this scheme. No, we got to run the Houston Veer. I was never really sold on it.
After a 23-14 loss to Oregon State, Oklahoma's offense was underwhelming a fan base that began to voice its displeasure with the coaching staff.
We had so much better talent than Oregon State. They were big and slow. And we had Greg Pruitt, we had Joe Wiley, Jack Mildren, Roy Bell. We had speed and quickness. We had better athletes. They won the ball game. We just, had championship teams 2 years before. And next thing I know is that, hey, they're wanting to fire us. And I was part of wanting to get us fired because, hey, I told Chuck the only problem we had about running this Houston Veer, we didn't bring Bill Yeoman back with us.
A bye week separated the Sooners from their next game against Darrell Royal's red-hot and #2 ranked Texas Longhorns.
Thank goodness we had an open date in 1970 before we played Texas. I said, Chuck, we're going to get fired. When you get fired, we're all fired. And I said, that's what's going to happen if we don't change our offense and go to the wishbone. And he looked at me and he stared at me, didn't say anything. And I said, I've talked to the staff. I've talked to defense and offensive staff. They're 100% behind me. I can't be in here talking to you if I didn't have their support. And they all agree with me. It's the best thing for us to do. Offensively, it's the best thing for us to do. It gives us a chance to be what Texas is. We've got better talent in Texas. Let's prove it. And he sat there and stared at me. He says, let me have a night to think about it.
I really had a hard time with that decision, because to make a change in the course of the season, that much of a change, is not an easy thing to do. My college coach and a great mentor of mine was Biggie Munn from Michigan State. I remember I called him the night before I made the decision, got him out of bed at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, told him that I had to make a decision, and later, after he passed away, I saw his wife Vera, and she told me about what happened that night. He said that Biggie came in and woke me up. He said, Vera, I want you to make some coffee. He said, Chuck's got a real hard decision to make, and I told him I'd call him tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And he stayed up all night thinking about questions to ask me, and he called me 8 o'clock. Phone rang, and he said, I want to ask you 2 questions. He said, can you convince your players that this is the right thing to do? And can you convince your staff that this is the right thing to do? And I said, I think so. And he said, well, then go ahead and do it, but don't ever look back, because you're going to have some growing pains. And we did.
We go to the wishbone, we practice it for 2 weeks, we go play Texas and get the hell beat out of us.
For Texas had created the wishbone, and in 1970 they collected for patent infringement.
But we took the ball and controlled it for 6 or 7 minutes against a team that won the national championship that year. And we didn't convert with it because we were just a child crawling right now. But I could see where we were going to be something special. And the next week we play Colorado. And we're going to play Eddie Crowder's team up in Colorado, and they were good. So on Thursday night, we had a Beat Colorado party. All the coaches and the wives got together, and we dressed up and dragged. The women dressed as men. We dressed as women. We all had lipstick on, Jimmy Johnson and I, and Lacewell, and that's when women wore wigs. We put hair wigs on. We go to each other's houses, and they don't know we're coming. So we go in, they can't figure out, who is this? And then it's make them get dressed up and go with us. So we go to Chuck's house, and he comes out and put his sequin. After a few minutes, he goes back there and has his sequin dress, silver dress on, and he comes out dressed like that with a wig on. And we had the best time. You know what we do? We go up and kill Colorado.
The year we put it in, we were last in the conference in offense. And at the end of the year, we were first. We lost to Kansas State, who had a good team. And we lost to them. I met with our players on Sunday. We met them in the stadium, sunny, bright, sunny morning, set everybody down on the 50-yard line. They were young. And I told them right there, I said, fellas, if they're going to beat us, they better do it real fast, because it's not going to be very long when nobody's going to touch us. And it didn't take long.
Oklahoma's strong turnaround landed the team a date with Coach Bear Bryant's Alabama Crimson Tide in the Bluebonnet Bowl at Houston, Texas. Coach Bryant had developed a reputation for strong, formidable teams. It was his influence that led Jim McKenzie to install the rigorous off-season conditioning program that Oklahoma had implemented. When the two teams faced off on New Year's Eve, the score ended with the only tie in OU Bowl game history at 24-24. But Bryant was so impressed with the new wishbone that he decided to install it in Tuscaloosa the next season. By 1971, the wishbone had arrived. Through its first 9 games of the season, Oklahoma was undefeated, defeating opponents by an average of nearly 29 points per game. 450 miles to the north, Bob Devaney's Husker squad was immovable, undefeated, and beating opponents by more than 4.5 touchdowns per game. Nebraska was ranked number 1 in the country, Oklahoma number 2. The Thanksgiving Day Clash, played on Owen Field in cold, dreary weather, brought together 2 juggernauts, 2 bitter rivals in the game of the century.
Who is number 1? This is the game that will decide it.
The reason that was such an amazing game is they were ranked number 1 and number 2 in the nation, both undefeated, and there was a week off in between the game. So, I mean, number 1 versus number 2, just national publicity every day. It was just a big game, and just a terrific ball game once it was played, and controversial.
The game lived up to all the expectations that both sides had. There was a year-long anticipation about this game going to be really for the national championship.
Well, it was back and forth, and Oklahoma had started running the wishbone, and we didn't really know a whole lot about stopping the wishbone, and we really didn't. They ran up and down the field on us.
Jack Mildren was such a talented player. He could throw the ball with great touch. If I had thrown the ball 6 more times to Johnny Harrison in the 71 game, we would have beaten Nebraska probably 2 or 3 touchdowns.
Oklahoma was running primarily a 6-1 defense at that time, and we ran a lot of counter plays where a fullback would go one way and the I-back the other, and the middle backer was frozen. The center would get out on him, and so we had pretty good success running that particular play.
We scored 31 points and rushed for 400. You know, you think like Lacewell said, hell, you scored enough for a good defense to protect.
The punt return by Johnny Rogers, making a long punt return for a touchdown. The thing that happened that I remember about that play is Greg Pruitt was on our punting team. He was covering punts. He was so fast. The Nebraska punt return was designed to be a right return. And the minute that Rogers caught the ball, Pruitt hit him with a lot of force and spun him all the way around, and Johnny ends up running down the left side without any blocking, but everybody could see the blocking pattern going to our left and to their right. I think he might have gotten a little disoriented right there at the beginning because he got away from Greg's tackle and made a great run down the sideline to score that. That was a big play in that game.
Our quarterback was Jerry Taggy, and Jeff Kinney was running back. Johnny Rogers had a great punt return in the game for a touchdown. Made a key reception.
Taggy's at midfield. It's their last drive.
And we had a timeout, and we called a defense to rush the passer. And Raymond Hamilton got free.
A lone setback with 2 wings out and in going out now. Taggy, just missed. Again by 96 Hamilton. Johnny Rogers caught the ball, and it's a Nebraska first down and a big one.
Had we been successful there, we could have killed the timeout on the clock and won that game.
But that was certainly a big game, pivotal game, and I don't think either team could be terribly proud of their defense, but both offenses moved the ball pretty well. The next year, Oklahoma went to a 5-2 defense like we played, and then they got better on defense, and it wasn't as easy from that point on.
Oklahoma State welcomed an angry Sooner squad to Stillwater the following week. While smashing the Cowboys 58-14, Coach Fairbanks' squad set a new NCAA season record for 566 total yards per game. The victory was followed with a Sugar Bowl trip to New Orleans and the challenge of facing Auburn's Heisman-winning quarterback, Pat Sullivan. Oklahoma countered with a star quarterback of its own in Jack Mildren, who ran to the end zone 3 times and walked away with the game MVP honors. The stat sheet favored the stronger rushing team, Mildred's Sooners scored 40 points on only 4 pass attempts, while Sullivan's Auburn squad went to the air 44 times for only 22 points. Oklahoma had found its identity. Twice in Coach Fairbanks' 5 seasons in Norman, his team came 1 victory shy of a national championship. With Fairbanks at the helm, Crimson eyes turned to 1972 for another chance at glory.
The football team at Marshall, you know, had been in a tragic plane crash, and they made, as I recall, some of the, I think they made students at Marshall as freshmen eligible to play. I think my year here was the first year freshmen were, you know, able to play across the board in 1972.
I elected to come to OU, and it was a great decision, obviously, and fortunately for me, we were thin on receivers. John Carroll, which was a great receiver here, kicker and so on, John got hurt, and so they needed a receiver, and it so happened I had a good practice against the varsity one day. I didn't think I could play on the varsity, number one, as a freshman, maybe not a sophomore, junior, or a senior. I ended up catching like 2 touchdown passes against defensive backs, starting defensive backs, and so on. So that kind of launched my career to be able to even play as a freshman.
I knew then that coming in as a freshman, I had a chance to play in the same backfield with Greg Pruitt.
With the January 1972 passing of the NCAA rule that made freshmen eligible for varsity competition, the travel itinerary of coaches across the country led to Eufaula, Oklahoma. That is for every coach but Chuck Fairbanks.
Everybody and their brother was in there recruiting them. OU was exactly where their mother, who was the matriarch of the family, that's where she wanted those boys to go. And she told me way long before signing date that she asked me, did I want the boys to come to school there? And I said, yes, I do. She said, I'll tell you when it's time to come over and talk to them. So finally, just a few days before the signing date, I hadn't been to see them yet. And all the coaches, when are you going to go? When are you going to go see these guys? Darrell Royal was in there. Frank Broyles was in there. Finally, one day the phone rang, and Mrs. Selman, she said, hi, Coach. She said, I think it's time to come over and talk to the boys. Went to their home, and Mr. Selman and Mrs. Selman were there, and she had her best dress on and made some cookies. And I talked and talked for a long time about school and about playing, and finally Mrs. Selman said, Leroy, you got any questions? He said, no, man. That's the first word he'd said in the 2 hours. And I said, Dewey, you got any questions? No, ma'am. And she said, well, Coach, said, you got those papers? Says, looks like you got them.
The loss of 7 starters had little effect as Oklahoma began to roll through the schedule. Utah State was the first to fall, 49-0, before Oklahoma scored on 9 straight possessions against Oregon to send the Ducks back to Eugene with a 68-3 loss.
About 3rd or 4th week of the season, and the announcer for the Chuck Fairbanks show just turned to Greg and said, Greg, you know, people have been watching Joe Washington run, and they're saying that some of Joe Washington's moves are better than yours. What do you think? And Greg just immediately said, yeah, I used to use some of those moves in high school myself.
Clemson got only a field goal to match the Sooners' 52 points, and Darrell Royal's 100-game scoring streak was snapped when his team met with the talented Oklahoma defense. The 27-0 victory helped to position the team at number 2 in the country, just before a date with number 9 Colorado in Boulder.
People sometimes forget Colorado was number 3 in the country in '71. It was the first time we saw teams just line up. They didn't line up sound, they just lined up in places just for confusion purposes. And that was an issue in the game. Then we made some mistakes at the wrong times, and of course Colorado ended up just beating us, which was enough to take us out of the #1 ranking in the country.
Oklahoma wouldn't be challenged again until its trip to Lincoln later that season. With the Big 8 championship on the line, a national television audience tuned in for another Red and Crimson Classic.
Dave Robinson was a quarterback that was recruited under another system of play. He came, he stayed, and those that stay usually play. He was surrounded by great talent. He had Greg Pruitt, Joe Wiley, Roy Bell, great defensive talent. He had good players around him. But a quarterback that was really not a wishbone quarterback. But he didn't make mistakes, and he could throw the football. And when we had the throw, and we had the throw to win that one, we had a receiver that could catch it, and Tinker Owens, and we got a guy that could throw it. And we had to throw the ball to win, and we made a lot of big plays. But Tinker at the right time, and Dave put the ball on, Tinker made the catches, and we beat Vandy's last team in '72, the last game he coached.
Few could have anticipated that Oklahoma was also about to face a coaching change. The one-loss season culminated with the 14-0 shutout of Joe Paterno's Penn State team in the Sugar Bowl. But the celebration quickly turned to speculation as Sooner fans wondered about the direction of the program and the identity of a new coach.
Chuck calls me in his office and says to me, he says, I'm going to take a pro football job. I'm going to the New England Patriots. Billy Sullivan has offered me the job, and I want you to come as my backfield coach. And I said to him, Chuck, I want this job. If you're leaving, I want this. And he said, I figure you're going to say that. If you don't get this job, you can come with me. 3 days later, I got the job. And the only, emphatically say this, and it is the God's truth, I would not have gotten this job had not Jack Santee been on the Board of Regents. He played for Bud Wilkinson. He knew what it was, the importance of keeping a winning staff. They were united behind me in support of me as being the head coach. And he knew how important that would be to keep that continuity, to keep that staff in place. And he held the interview with me in the old Boyd house. It was a 2-hour conversation between me and Jack Santee. He says, you've got the job, we'll give you 9 months. I said, that's all I need.
A meeting was called down there in the locker room, and we were down there waiting for Coach Switzer to come. And Coach Switzer walks in there, and we just start clapping. You know, just start clapping, and it was a love affair right from the get. Everybody just embraced him completely, and truly, and really and truly, we wanted to become a team and win, not only for ourselves, but for our head coach. And that's just the way he inspired you.
Barry Switzer, the son of a bootlegger from Crossett, Arkansas, had accepted his first head coaching position at just 35 years of age. A co-captain on his Arkansas Razorback team, Barry was used to giving out the hits as a linebacker, but as head coach at Oklahoma, it took only 3 months for Coach Switzer to receive his first hit. In April, the Big 8 Conference discovered 2 Oklahoma players had altered high school transcripts, subsequently banning one of the hottest teams in the nation from television and bowl games for 2 years.
When it happened, when it came down, all those factors, these were personal relationships, and it hit home, and you could tell that it was emotionally staggering to Coach Switzer.
Our goal is to win the Big 8 Conference Championship and challenge for the National. Well, they can't take that away from us. You know, we're going to still do that. And the team that represents the Big 8 Conference on TV or in a bowl game, we hope that they're the second best.
It was just one of those things that you kind of pleased yourself, I guess, if you will, and we didn't please ourselves very well.
My sophomore year, because of the television contract, we would be on television.
That's why we couldn't be on the next year and the following year. But then we could go to the bowl game in '75.
So really, that 2-year probation really affected us for 3 years.
The quarterback that we were going to use was declared ineligible.
I'll never forget coming to the practice field that particular day. Kerry Jackson has been ruled ineligible, and Galen Hall tosses the ball to him, and he says, you're my quarterback.
Barry, for his first practice in the fall, had to use a quarterback that nobody had ever heard of, never had taken a snap in a single game. But I remember Barry coming out of a meeting that I was with him at the president's office. I know he was upset coming out because he said, you know, in the fall, when we can't move the football, I'm going to get a lot of people who are angry at me. He was under the gun before he even coached his first spring practice.
He inspired us to play with that chip on our shoulders. You know, coming here at Oklahoma, you know, you always have that chip anyway, because you know you have so much to play for. You have so much to prove.
I think the team was more focused during the probation period, just the fact that hey, we're not going to go to a bowl game. Let's prove to everybody that we're the best team in the country, and we were able to do that.
Everything was made clear. Hey, we're going to continue to be here. We aren't going anywhere. Now, if they weren't going to allow us to play football, that's another difference. But they were going to allow us to suit up, just like we do every week. And they weren't going to, you know, tie our hands behind our back, even though we could have whipped a few people with our hands behind our back.
The first game of the 1973 season carried Barry Switzer's trademark, a record-breaking, unstoppable running attack. Behind the wishbone offense, 3 OU backs crossed the century mark that day against the Baylor Bears. While the backfield of Wayman Clark and Steve Davis shined in the 42-14 victory, it was the performance of a sophomore from Port Arthur that took everyone's breath away.
I was a huge Texas fan. I love Darrell Royal. I love Darrell Royal's show. But I will say this, when Oklahoma switched to the wishbone and you see Greg Pruitt, Joe Wiley, Leon Crosswhite, and Jack Mildren running the wishbone, and the way they were running in those white shoes, up and down the field, 400 and 500 yards of offense, you take notice. And at that particular time, I didn't have really any knowledge that, you know, Southwestern Conference wasn't too big on recruiting, you know, black players. So I remember Coach Bill Michaels, he came by, sat in with the family, and right then and there, he's told me, he tells me, Joe, come to Oklahoma and you can do great things. You can win national championships, win conference championships, you'll be on television, you play all these big games, you'll be All-American, All-Conference, chance to win a Heisman Trophy. That sold me right then.
With Leroy Selman sidelined with a heart condition, a difficult test awaited the Sooners 2 weeks later at top-ranked and defending champion Southern California.
And I really do think that that chip got a little bit larger because, of course, it was Coach's first year, and here he is leading us into, you know, Lions Den.
I had a great football team. I mean, I had Lynn Swan and, you know, J.K. McKay and Pat Hayden and Sam Bam Cunningham. I mean, you go down the list of guys, Jim Obradovich. I mean, they just had a great football team, and it was muddy, it had rained, and Phil was, you know, we were used to AstroTurf, and it was a grass field and all that, and it slowed us down some as well. In fact, one of the greatest plays I've ever seen was I think a 2-yard loss by Joe Washington on a punt return.
I'm going back to catch a punt, and I can't remember, or I didn't get the signal as to which way the punt return was the wall was supposed to set up. I figure, you know, that, you know, once I catch the punt, you know, can retreat or go left or right or something, I knew I could buy a little time to where I could figure out a little bit, you know, what was taking place. The first few steps I took to the right to try to figure out, it didn't show then. I couldn't go back right, I couldn't go far because I've already caught the ball and I'm over by the numbers and the sideline. So I start back left, and this time I've switched the ball to my left hand. 2 cover guys from USC come up on me, and this guy grabs my mouthpiece. He has one hand on my shoulder with me stiffing and pushing, and he has one hand on that, and his right hand is pulling my mouthpiece. He pulls it, and it comes off. And when he pulls it and comes off, I make a quick turn back to the left, and it's off to the races.
In fact, if Lucius hadn't been watching, all of a sudden turned and watched us and just blocked the guy in front of him, taking him out, Joe would have broke the open field and scored with it.
We beat them every way we could except on the scoreboard. And so we all left Los Angeles knowing that, okay, we've got a chance to be a pretty good team.
People, you got everything to be proud of. You ought to hold your head high, because I guarantee you, those people in that next room, they can't.
Oklahoma ran through its next 7 opponents undefeated, setting up an Owen Field showdown with Nebraska's first-year head coach, Tom Osborne.
Their defense was really in full swing at that time. They had great players. We just probably weren't as talented. We were running out of the I formation, and our quarterback was more of a drop-back thrower. and we just couldn't handle the Selmans. They were outstanding, and they pretty much controlled the line of scrimmage, and I think we maybe did cross the 50 one time.
Always heard about the Selmans and how big they were, and you know, Dewey was a fullback and Leroy was a running back, and I'm going, how these guys running backs, they're this size, you know, for what I'd heard about them. And then when I saw them at the All-State game, I just couldn't believe how, you know, they were built and strong guys, and two of the nicest guys I ever met in my life.
First introduction to football was, one, we thought it was the stupidest thing ever seen. A bunch of guys on TV chasing around each other, hitting each other.
They asked me where did I get my speed and strength from. I said, well, it was from chasing cows and hogs and lifting them back into the pasturing field and the pen.
But then Lucius started playing football. And when he started playing football, the interest and the view of it changed. And soon it grew to be that, hey, football is pretty good. Let's try it.
Knowing his athletic ability and knowing Dewey's athletic ability, I knew they would be able to compete on the University of Oklahoma level and competition that we were playing, and probably be pretty superior against all competition which they would come up against.
Coach Switzer, I think, set a relationship between all of us. That he made us three feel comfortable in the position we were in, which is you must defend us at that down position. And we recognized, though, that the character of us, the mom and dad we come from, but he also knew that it come time to play football and stuff, gentle was not the word that we wanted to really go by. It was that we destroy anything out there.
Well, Big Cat was, well, first of all, the mere fact that we called him Big Cat really just personifies who he was.
Coach Switzer probably said to this day he's the greatest defensive player he ever had.
He was like a big Bengal tiger playing with his prey. It's almost like, you know, taking that big paw and, you know, just swatting you a little bit, knocking you around, tackle you, he'll hit you with one arm and you go down. And you knew that all he had to do is want to. He's the only guy that I know on the universe that could play a football game without a scold or a frown on his face. For him, it was a pleasantry. He was good.
Dewey just completely excelled at that position that he was playing, and just seeing Leroy in practice and everything, I knew his ability probably was better than Dewey's.
You know, here we go. Get down in my stance. Good step here. Get my hands in a good position. Grab the guy, get rid of him. Go down the line, trail him, make the tackle for a 4-yard loss. Come back to the hole, ready to do it again.
They were around the ball all the time, and just great people and great players, and I'm honored that I had a chance to play with all three of them.
Coach Switzer pulled me to the side and he said, you know, you got a chance to be an All-American football player, make several All-American football teams, if not consensus All-American. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, that would be pretty good. Then old Coach Switzer got a way of humbling me. He said, but you probably be about the third best Selman.
Greatest athletes, greatest unassuming people. And then when I say people, because you talk about the brothers. Then when you talk about the brothers, you talk about the sisters. And then if you're talking about the brothers and the sisters, you're talking about the family. So you're talking about a family of unassuming, unbelievable people.
We were just so fortunate to be a part of it, and the relationship between the Selmans family and Oklahoma. It's just a remarkable story, and each day I think about it and I thank God for it.
Mrs. Selman might have been the only person in the state with a higher popularity rating than Coach Switzer, as a 45-18 win against Oklahoma State completed an undefeated year. But NCAA probation kept the Sooners at home during bowl season.
You know, that was a period that I said earlier, Jack Santee was the reason I was the head coach at Oklahoma. He had confidence that we could get the job done, gave me that 9-month contract, and we never looked back. We went undefeated that year with the group of talent we had. We were playing Southern California. If we'd made the field goal, we kicked from the 11-yard line in the fourth quarter, we would have won the national championship.
With only 2 losses in the previous 3 years, Coach Switzer's program was poised to make another run at a national championship. Oklahoma's freshmen in 1974 hadn't seen a national championship trophy in Norman in their lifetime. And with the NCAA's television ban set to take place, the Sooners were nicknamed the best team you'll never see.
It was disappointing, but you know, we understood, hey, that was the rules, and we violated them, and we paid for it.
That team, I felt so sorry for so many teams that came here. And we knew that, you know, most of these guys didn't stand a chance. The only way a team could possibly stand a chance is instead of fumbling 7 times, we fumbled 10 times.
And it was almost like an invisible team because nobody knew where we were, what we were doing. We couldn't be on television, couldn't go to bowl games, and yet we were winning.
We understood, our coaches understood, and it wasn't any qualms about, you know, just us showing up. Now, we knew that, you know, you don't just show up. And we knew, you know, you've got to put in work, and we worked hard.
And so that was kind of our drive that season because, you know, you didn't have that little celebration at the end to go to a bowl game. So you said, well, okay, let's accomplish what we can.
Our practices were physical. Our 3-a-days were just brutal. And we were treated like creeps. Our offensive line were treated even worse than that. And it was just one of those times in a period to where it brought guys together.
Further fallout from the NCAA probations pressed Oklahoma coaches into an uncomfortable scenario. The American Football Coaches Association voted in January to disallow probated teams and head coaches from national awards and the weekly UPI poll.
It's a good rule. I mean, I'd be hard-pressed to find somebody that could adequately argue that it's not a good rule, but it was just a confluence of circumstances that made the Sooners the first victim.
This left the other 3 polls, the Football Writers Association of America, the National Football Foundation, and the Associated Press, as the only polls that considered all teams in their national championship votes. After clobbering Utah State 72-3 and Wake Forest 63-0, the results began to match the preseason hype. But as had been the case in other years, Texas had a chance to spoil everything. In the third quarter and down 10-7, Oklahoma found itself trailing for the first time all season. Billy Brooks, an Austin native, put Oklahoma back on top with a 40-yard touchdown run. But a missed extra point left the defense in a position to save the day for Sooner fans. Facing superstar freshman Earl Campbell, the Selman brothers forced several key fumbles to get Oklahoma out of the Cotton Bowl with a victory. The domination continued through the conference season, with Heisman Trophy-like performances taking place on both sides of the ball. With the television ban in effect, however, the efforts of a streaking pair of silver shoes went unnoticed.
I was painting him in the John, and he was in the John next to him, and he could smell the fumes of me painting, and he was wondering what was I doing. I said, I'm painting my shoes. He said, well, why are you doing it now? I said, well, if I did it before warm-ups and warm out during the warm-up, then the coaches could see, they could tell me to go change. So if I put them on now to go out to play, they're gonna tell me to come back in and change. It's too late. Nothing else was said about those shoes until my junior year. We're going to play Colorado. And Bill Mallory is I think is the new coach at Colorado. Coach calls me over, he's hot. He tells me about the article in the paper. Mallory is talking about, you know, the character of our team, and, you know, we've got maybe gangsters and thugs and no discipline, and he's just running a loose ship, and I mean, he's doing all this. Is what Coach is telling me, because I don't know anything about this. And he's saying he's got the fact that we've got a kid wearing silver shoes. He's Little Joe, he's talking about you and these silver shoes and how you undisciplined, and I'll let you guys do everything. I said, well, Coach, what do you want me to do? And I'm waiting for him to say, you want to wear white like everybody else? He says, go up there and put 200 on their ass. And he put me in. I ended up having 210 against him. When I came off the sideline, first thing he said, what do you think Mallory thinks about those silver shoes now?
To have any shot at a national title, Oklahoma would have to finish the year with convincing wins against Nebraska and Oklahoma State. Coach Switzer changed OU's four-man rush to just 3 prior to meeting Coach Osborne, and Oklahoma escaped Lincoln with a 28-14 win. The surprising challenge of the season came in the final game against Oklahoma State. Leading only 16-13 in the fourth quarter, Joe Washington ignited a 5-touchdown outburst in the final 7 minutes and 31 seconds, and Oklahoma pulled away with a 44-13 win. At the end of his 2 seasons, Barry Switzer could reflect on 21 victories and no losses. Oklahoma was undefeated in 29 straight games, and with no bowl game on the horizon, picked up its 4th national championship as the Associated Press voted the Sooners #1.
If we didn't get anybody hurt, we're gonna be just as good. If we played Oregon, on a wet field here, that's always tough for us. And throwing the football down, on a wet field, we're gonna do that. That's tough. That always gives a team a chance.
After Oklahoma's tune-up against Oregon, the defense put on a clinic for Tony Dorsett's Pittsburgh team. The star back from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, finished the '75 season with 1,686 yards, but managed only 17 against the stifling Sooner defense. Scott Hill left his impression on Sooner fans and Dorsett with a leveling hit that exemplified the Oklahoma dominance. The following week, Oklahoma traveled to the Orange Bowl for an out-of-conference date with Miami. Rumors swirled around South Beach that the Hurricanes football program might be discontinued, but speculation had little impact on the Miami players. Behind the Selmans and game-saving work by Dewey, Oklahoma secured a hard-fought 2017 victory. The Buffaloes of Colorado then gave the preseason #1 team another scare. The narrow 21-20 triumph left some asking if Switzer's teams were losing their edge.
I've always known that, coaches always get together, to try to, if they've got something that they're having a problem to stop. And even to this day, coaches will call each other up on the phone. How did you defense it? What do you do with this? What do you do that? And I know folks were doing that.
Tensions between Norman and Austin heightened, with Coach Royal looking for his first win over the young Switzer.
Texas was the one that instituted the rule that head coach can only go see a prospective student athlete one time. They wanted to limit the number of times I could go see a player, especially in Texas, and it was authored and instituted and promoted by the University of Texas for the NCAA vote. And I said, obviously, there's some coaches who rather listen to guitar pickers and go out and work hard at their job. And there's people south of the Red River that took it personal. Maybe they had the right to, but I was cocky, I was brash. That was my attitude back then. If I was 50 years old, I'd rather be sitting around listening to guitar pickers out chasing 18-year-old kids too.
Knotted at 17-17 with only 8 minutes to go, Steve Davis's heady audible got Horace Ivory into the open field to give the Sooners the go-ahead touchdown. Sooner fans could finally breathe easy. Coach Switzer's team was back on track, running through the next 3 opponents by a combined 91-17 score. The program took a 28-game winning streak into Week 9 and an avalanche of misfortune that no one could have anticipated.
7 fumbles, 2 interceptions, 2 block kicks. Yeah, you might lose that one, So you didn't think those things would happen, but you knew those were the kind of things that had to happen in order for you to lose football games.
Second half, it came out and our fans were booing, and I said to Steve Davis, are they booing the other team? He said, no, they're booing us. We'd never been booed. We were always being cheered for, and it's easy to get spoiled. Fans get spoiled. You expect to win every game. I expect OU to win every game now. I know it's not going to happen, but as a fan and former player, you expect us every time we go play. It doesn't matter if it's home, away, or whatever. Joe Washington said one time, he said, I knew when we played Kansas, you never dropped a ball your whole career, and you dropped a ball against Kansas, I knew it was going to be a bad day. It was so bad when we lost that everybody just, it was like we were all in shock. We actually lost the game on Owen Field. You got to be kidding.
None of those players, none of us had ever experienced a loss. So we were stunned.
So I really don't recall what Coach said. I don't think he said much of anything. It went without saying, we got outplayed and we blew the game.
We play those teams again, you can rest assured. You know, the end result against Kansas would be definitely different.
The next week we had to play at Missouri, and which was a big game for us.
They're always going to be physical, but I never thought there was a chance that, you know, it would come down to last minute part of the game. I always thought we'd beat them by at least 14 points.
We led 20-0 at the half. It's one of those games we thought we had under control, and we're going to win it and maybe put half 100 on them. All of a sudden, got back in the game, we got a little momentum, and the next thing we know, we're down. So it looks like we're going to lose 2 in a row. We hadn't lost a game at 38 till the week before against Kansas, and it's 4th and 1, and we call timeout.
And we have the ball on our own 28-yard line. There's less than 3 minutes to go.
Obviously, if we give it up on 4th and 1, the game's over.
We're standing in the huddle, and no one is really uttering anything. I'm standing up, you know, looking on the sideline because I know one thing, I want the ball.
But I remember telling Steve Davis, you make sure little Joe touches his ball. The key on the play was Victor Hicks. Steve came out, made the end take him, fake, and pitched the ball late to Joe. Victor Hicks does a great job of taking the corner out.
So as soon as I touch the ball and I plant the cut upfield behind Victor's block, I know we've got that 1 yard.
And I got too much excited in the press box. And as he broke free, I yelled,
Go, Joe, 45, 50. Joe Washington will go on. Joe Washington has gone all the way for a touchdown.
That was one of the most emotional runs I've ever had in my life. I made 2 cuts to the left. Boom, boom.
And he jukes back inside, hits open field, and man, it was all over with.
But that still left us a point behind.
So they called timeout again, which is good because we've got to go for 2. And our guys are excited, but they know there's still something to do at hand. And they called the same play. They knew it was coming, and they still didn't stop it. And they swear that I didn't make it.
To this day, I don't know if he made it or not. All I know is they gave it to him.
Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder will tell you that it was touchdown. I promise you.
And I tell people to this day, Joe Washington was the best player I ever played with, not only in college, but in pros.
But just to see him come out every day and work his butt off, I knew then that I had to either try to, match that or be just as good.
Washington's heroics moved him past Steve Owens as the Big 8's all-time rushing leader and right through a 25-point victory over Nebraska. The Orange Bowl welcomed Oklahoma back for the first time since Chuck Fairbanks' first year as head coach. Quarterback Steve Davis had already led his team to 1 national title, and as he gave the pregame invocation, the prayers of Sooner fans were answered as the public address announcer interrupted Davis with the news that the top-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes had just been upset by UCLA in the Rose Bowl.
I mean, the place goes nuts. Everybody, Oklahoma fans are reacting to it. So I think I said something along the lines, at least it's good news. Now let's finish the prayer. And so I just kept praying. And so I prayed. I go in the dressing room, and Galen Hall, biting his fingernails, comes over to me. His eyes are big as $50. He says, this game just got really important.
That was a heck of a football game. In fact, I'll never forget toward the end of the game, we're backed up. We're like on the 2-yard line, backed up. I had to punt my senior year. Our kicking team was not stellar in blocking. We didn't practice it much. Most of the time we were scoring touchdowns. We didn't practice the punting game much. Here I am standing, we had to punt, and I'm standing right on the edge of the, back of the end zone. I was thinking, man, I got to catch the ball and I got to get rid of it. because I knew if I got rid of the ball and they didn't block it, the Selman brothers and the rest of the defense were going to stop Michigan. There's no way. We stopped Michigan all day long. There's no way they're going to score on us. I kicked the ball like 35 yards. I went out to the 35-yard line. So they got great field position to score. I don't think they couldn't even get a first down. You know, looking back on that, I realized there was a lot more pressure on that than I realized at the time.
2 straight national championships. Coach Switzer, the young, unproven coach from Arkansas, had carved a legacy into the rich Oklahoma program in just 3 short years. 32 victories, 1 loss, 1 tie, 19 All-Americans. 28 NFL draft picks, highlighted by #1 overall draft pick Leroy Selman, #4 Joe Washington, and #11 Billy Brooks. Sooner fans had found their head coach. Oklahoma was back. As good as the coaching was at Oklahoma, the team could be defined by one word: talented. Coach Switzer perfected the craft of the wishbone offense, but it was the recruiting trail that was his masterpiece.
When I took over as head coach, I told him, I said, Barry, I'm going to make you the offensive coordinator. He said, I'm not ready for that. I said, yeah, you are. That's the end of this conversation. You're going to be it. At the beginning, he was way too critical of everybody he saw. He said, this guy can't play, you know. And once he knew that that's what he was going to do, he dug in, and he was very, very smart. Later on, he let others, when he became head coach, he let others do the evaluation, and he was a good salesman.
I said, you know, I've been named head football coach, but I want to tell you this. I want you to know we're going to recruit the best players we can find at all positions.
It was a completely different era, and let's call it like it was. Bud integrated OU, but the integration of the black athlete really hadn't taken place around the country, except for in the far north, as it did until Barry came.
I think he made everybody feel at home. Black, white, red, yellow, I don't think it really mattered, because at the end of the day, I think Barry, was agnostic. He was colorblind. He didn't care where you were from, who your parents were, what color you were. He was looking for, athletes that could come in and make Oklahoma the best program.
The state of Texas had what they call a blue chip award or whatever, the top players in the state. I think Coach Switzer recruited 13 out of the 17 of them. My freshman year came to Oklahoma.
In fact, Texas still was way behind OU as far as the recruiting of the black athlete.
A lot of our guys didn't want to go to Texas because of the past history of the school, and when it came to a black player.
I tell moms and dads, if you allow your son to come be a part of my family, I promise you I will treat him like he's one of my own. I think Keith Jackson's mother put it best. She said to me, after I'd signed Keith, "You're the only coach that ever came to my own home that made me feel comfortable." And I thought, that's what I've always been trying to do all my life, is make them comfortable in their own home. And I had that ability to do it, but yet I never described it that way and took Gladys to tell me that.
We began to move more toward option football, and we also began to recruit quarterbacks that could run the option, quarterbacks that had more speed, agility, athleticism. So Oklahoma was really never our enemy. Oklahoma was our friend in that they kind of showed us what we had to do. We couldn't bring them down to our level. We had to get up to their level.
After capturing 2 straight national championships and 3 conference titles, Oklahomans had much to be thankful for. A tie against Texas and losses at Oklahoma State and Colorado quickly moved the '76 season into a rebuilding year. But no matter what the year, the Thanksgiving showdown against the Cornhuskers always captured the attention of the nation. In Lincoln, the Sooners were down 17-6 in the 4th quarter. Elvis Peacock turned in a 51-yard run to pull OU within 4, but the 2-point conversion failed. Facing 3rd and 19 on their next possession, it looked like the Sooners' window of opportunity had closed. Unless Peacock could pry it open, Coach Switzer needed some magic.
That was a big play for us. The things that we did on Saturdays, we practiced all that stuff during the week. And you would never think that we would run that play during a game. It was a play that we needed. And Steve Rose, sure-handed, he sure-hand kid, and with his speed, because a lot of the Florida kids had tremendous speed, so what greater play at the right time. It really bust the game open for us.
And I think you got to get at the Coach Switzer. He would do some things in games, and you'd be like, man, he had a lot of kahunas, you know. And we end up, because I've seen some games where we should have lost. And he'd make a play or call, and it turns it around. And man, we start, you know, calling it Sooner Magic.
Everybody, let's go. Come on, y'all, let's go now. Let me tell you. Now, hold up. We are champions. We're going again.
The 2017 victory secured Oklahoma's 10th Big 8 championship. The subsequent 41-7 victory in the Fiesta Bowl over Wyoming capped the strong finish to the season and installed OU as the preseason favorite for 1977, another year that would be defined by Sooner Magic.
We had held Thomas out. He had had a severe hamstring pull. He didn't play in the first 2 ball games, and we even struggled the week before against Vanderbilt, and we had inserted a freshman quarterback, Jay Jimerson, and Jay had played extremely well and kind of beat Vanderbilt with a 40-yard run for a touchdown late in the ball game.
I think after that game, that made us kind of understand that we just can't go into a stadium and it's automatic like that, even though in the back of our mind, that's what we always thought.
Coach Switzer's players received the wake-up call, regaining their confidence with a dominating 62-24 win over Utah. Attention quickly shifted to Columbus, Ohio, where the #2 ranked Sooners looked to one of the biggest non-conference games in their history, a bout with #6 Ohio State. The owner of 5 national titles, legendary Ohio State coach Woody Hayes would finally get a shot at measuring himself against Oklahoma in the first ever meeting between the schools.
That was probably my first big, serious big game, I thought.
And we were just in awe of being in Ohio in Woody Hayes Stadium. And we got off the bus, and a lot of their fans was there, and they looked at us and said, oh boy, these guys don't have a chance of staying with Ohio State. They so small. But they forgot we was fast.
We were struggling along offensively, but when we inserted Thomas a lot with Billy Sims, it was lights out. And we were on our way to hanging half 100 on Ohio State.
About the second quarter, we was up 20-0.
And then all of a sudden it started raining.
I get hurt, I injure my Achilles, so I don't finish the game.
And then Thomas gets hurt.
Ohio State got back into the game, about to go, well, it went ahead, actually.
We were down by 8 points. We covered a fumble, and we drove and scored a touchdown, 28-26. We tried to go for 2 to tie the ball game and failed, so we had to get the ball back. And I kicked the onside kick. We got the ball back. We got us in the field goal range and got us in the middle of the field, and we called a timeout to give me an opportunity to go out there and go through my mental process.
Well, I think it was less than 10 seconds left in the game. And you got over 100,000 people in there, so it's time for Von Schaum to go kick.
I was ready to kick, and Coach Woody Hayes called a timeout. The timeout kind of irritated me. And then I kind of went back in the middle of the field, and I had my helmet off at that time. And I never noticed the crowd, but at that point I noticed the crowd yelling, "Block that kick."
Now he's out in the middle of the field, directing the crowd, block that kick. You know, I knew kicker was crazy, but that was real crazy. I'm like, no, Von Schaum, no. He's out there doing all this.
And so we were all on the sideline praying. I don't think I looked initially, but I kind of, doing the kick, I raised up and just kind of watched to see if, you know, are we going to win or are we going to lose?
It is long enough. It is good. Wow. With 3 seconds to play in the game.
When he made that kick, at that time period, you could hear a rat pissing on cotton. That's how quiet it got in that stadium.
I'd always say to Uwe, I said, boy, I was glad you were there. I'm glad you kicked that field goal. And I never questioned whether you'd hit or not. But let me tell you something, Uwe. Thomas Lawton hadn't got hurt in the first quarter. Billy Sims hadn't sprained his ankle in the first quarter. We're going to hang a half 100 on their ass. We ain't going to need your damn field goal. It's coach. Don't take that away from me.
One of our assistant coaches, he told his girlfriend before we went to Columbus, he said, if we win this game, I want to marry you. And I saw him about 5 years later, and he said, I sure wished you would have missed that son of a gun.
Oklahoma coasted through Kansas before running into Texas. First-year head coach Fred Akers and Heisman-winning running back Earl Campbell.
When I was a Roughneck at the university, we played University of Texas, and I think it was in '77. It was Gerald Ford's last year as president, and he came to the football game. And before the game, the Secret Service came and met with the Roughnecks, and they pointed to several positions in the stadium, saying, if you see there and you see there, there are snipers. And if you raise your shotgun in any way that approximates Gerald Ford's position in the stadium, one of those snipers will shoot you. And so we had a hard time finding anyone willing to shoot the shotguns during that football game.
With Billy Sims sidelined, Oklahoma fell to Texas for the first time in 7 seasons. Coach Switzer's team rebounded with 6 straight victories to capture the Big 8 title and the Orange Bowl berth against his alma mater, Arkansas. Notre Dame gave Oklahoma a shot at another national championship when it knocked off Texas in the Cotton Bowl, and the Sooners went off as a 17-point favorite after Arkansas Razorback coach Lou Holtz suspended 4 players before the game. It didn't take long for Oklahoma to find the magic again. In the first game of the '78 season, an onside kick gave Stanford a fighting chance at a monumental upset, but Darrell Ray ended the suspense with an interception in the end zone to end the Cardinal threat. West Virginia awaited the Sooners in Norman the following week, led by senior Thomas Lott. Oklahoma breezed to a 52-10 victory.
We've had great quarterbacks here as far as wishbone quarterbacks, but I don't think nobody is as good as Thomas Lott was. To be a great quarterback, especially to be a wishbone quarterback, you got to have more than just speed all the time, even though he was lightning fast, and it was hard to determine if he had the ball or not.
Really, he was a running back at a quarterback position.
He wore the bandana on his head just to keep his hair kind of neat. I believe that you can look at every wishbone quarterback that Oklahoma's had, and I don't think anybody has the smoothness of the game the way he had. He just brought a different feel and a different level of the game, because defenders didn't know, did he keep the ball or did he hand it off? And then once he did, flip it to Sims or Overstreet or something like that, I mean, the only thing they had to do was just run for the goalpost. I think he's still probably the best wishbone quarterback that I've ever seen.
The quick feet of Lott and Sims were formidable. The Sooners knocked off their next 3 opponents by at least 3 touchdowns before an injury put Lott on the sideline for the Kansas match. His replacement, sophomore quarterback J.C. Watts, looked on eagerly as Kansas missed on a 2-point conversion with 12 seconds left in the game, and OU survived. Junior Billy Sims carried the team through the next 3 games, rushing for 200 yards, and in doing so, vaulted himself squarely into consideration for the Heisman Trophy. Just 3 wins from another national title, Oklahoma met Coach Osborne's team in Lincoln on a cold November morning.
We were the best team in the country. We went #1. We were undefeated. We led it in every category, offensively and defensively.
2 great teams, great traditions, a lot of great players. We pretty much knew each other, offense, knew what they was going to do. We always had one trick play or something like that.
Bob Devaney's last year, Oklahoma beat us here in Lincoln, 17-14. And then the first 5 games that when I was the head coach, 73 through 77, we lost. And people here were getting antsy. There was no question that even though we would win 9 or 10 games a year, in most cases people would have said those are pretty good years. They weren't good years if you lost to Oklahoma. So Oklahoma came up here in '78 with a very fine team. Billy Sims obviously was part of that crew, and we hit one of our players, John Rood, hit Kelly Phelps on a kickoff return during that game at about the 20-yard line. Phelps went over so fast that the official did not rule it a fumble. That would have been the game, because I think there was about 3 minutes left. We would have had the ball at their 20-yard line, and we're ahead 17-14. And then Oklahoma proceeded to take the ball down the field, and Sims fumbled at, I think, the 3-yard line.
The pitch is outside to Sims. He runs through a tackle. He's down to the 5-yard line. He fumbles. Nebraska's got the ball. Jim Pillen has the ball. Sims fumbles for the Sooners. They've lost it 6 times.
there was an off-tackle play, and I'm, running off-tackle, breaking 2 or 3 guys, keeping from me. I think a guy came from a blind side and punched it out. They ended up recovering the ball.
One of our players, Jim Pillen, recovered the fumble.
But what people really don't realize and tend to forget, we had over 3 minutes left in that game. And our defense playing good. And we can get the ball back, at least we can hold them or kick a field goal, try to tie it up or whatever.
And then we ran the ball out for the next 3-4 minutes, ended up out near midfield. And of course, people often point to that fumble, but also I think it was very important that we were able to hang on to the ball and to get several first downs, because if we'd had to punt from the 3-yard line, they probably would have scored. So it was a very hard-hitting game and a lot of turnovers in the ball game.
We lost 17-14. We fumbled 9 times. We lost 6 that day.
We benefited from many of those turnovers.
If they had fumbled that many times, we would have hung half 100 on them, I promise you. We wallered and gave that game away. It wasn't anyone's fault.
I took it personal because I felt like I let the whole team down. There's only 2 games I ever cried in. High school, when I lost the state championship, and that one there in Nebraska.
It was just one of those days. We couldn't overcome the last fumble and would have won the game.
I knew if we ever got another chance to redeem myself, it was going to be a different story.
With a champion spirit, Oklahoma rebounded with a 62-7 victory over Oklahoma State, setting up an opportunity for a historical rematch.
All right, now what has happened is that with Georgia getting beat, the Tide is like getting beat, so that puts Alabama. Penn State more than likely is going to go to the Sugar Bowl to play Alabama. Now what it does to us, it does this. The Orange Bowl is meeting right now in an executive meeting. They're considering, I don't know, the possibility of taking us, or probably more likely to ask us to come play Nebraska again in the Orange Bowl.
Coach Switzer had talked to somebody, and they said that we were going to have an opportunity to play Nebraska again in the Orange Bowl.
They had Coach Tom Osborne, had him on live, and he was on the phone, and he was talking to the Orange Bowl committee, waiting to hear who he's going to play.
We have asked, as your opponent, the University of Oklahoma.
We think that the rematch will be a very exciting game and one with a tremendous amount of appeal. Hello?
So it was a kind of a tough scenario, and one that many of us here weren't too pleased with.
And so we're very excited to have gotten the opportunity to play them again. It's just hard for a team to beat you twice.
And we knew that they didn't really want to play us again, not that early. I just knew once the game started that I was going to go all out and make sure what happened in Nebraska wasn't going to happen there in Miami.
We probably had maybe the better motivation to win that game.
We played pretty well down there. I think we had around 500 yards of offense, and Oklahoma didn't have anywhere near that much. But I think we had a couple turnovers at key times, and so it's kind of the reverse up here in Lincoln.
I feel like I had gave something back to the Sooner Nation, the fact that we had won that game.
As time went on, we began to win our share. We didn't win all the time, certainly, but certainly those early years were tough on us.
Oklahoma finished the season at 11-1, capped by Simms' Orange Bowl redemption and his own declaration as the 1978 Heisman Trophy winner.
Coming out of high school during that time period, not bragging, I was the second leading rusher nationally with over 7,000 yards. J.C. Watts, at one time, we was running the scout team, and we was having the Selman brothers, the chasers. It was a whole lot of running and no blocking because nobody could block the Selman guys. And I didn't like that at all. You know, I'm getting out of here. You know, I didn't come into this program for that. My sophomore year, I was getting ready to start. I fractured my shoulder, so I ended up getting a redshirt year. I was thinking maybe all those injuries and hits was catching up with me. And probably the best thing that happened to me was that injury year. I became dedicated to my craft, even quit. at one time. Nobody knew this but Coach Switzer and I. And I think, you know, when you're young like that, you're getting second thoughts, but he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself.
78 was Billy Sims' year. It was fun to watch him because he did a lot of acrobatic type things that really helped us get to where we did go.
Coming into that season, really, I was just fortunate to be healthy for a change. They was really promoting Kenny King and Thomas Lott and some of the other guys for different awards.
Nobody could top what he was doing during that time.
The year before that, I had no preseason build-up, none of that stuff. The high stepping and all the diving really came from my tumbling class that I used to take in St. Louis, Missouri. When I went to moved to Texas, they didn't know what gymnastic classes were. So for a black kid in the inner city, I even played hockey. They didn't know what hockey and soccer was when I went down to Texas. You talking late 60s, early 70s, but I played it. And the only way I became a running back was the coach knew I played soccer and I had speed and I was pretty good with my feet. So, and the fact that I was so afraid of getting hit, I was always thought when I ran, I just made the moves to keep guys from hitting me.
He was a great football player, did a lot for Oklahoma.
Anybody could have won the Heisman because we had a lot of great players in that backfield and on that team.
Oklahoma began the 1979 season with the nation's #3 ranking and a date with Iowa. The Hawkeyes' defense was on point, recovering 5 of the Sooners' 7 fumbles. But Iowa's defense couldn't convert, and Oklahoma took an ugly 21-6 win. During that contest, one Sooner legend met another, although nobody knew it at the time. Sims's name was etched in the Oklahoma annals forever, and 20 years later, that same could be said for an Iowa freshman defensive back named Bobby Stoops.
He didn't tackle. Not on that picture, not on that play.
He says he made the tackle, you say he didn't.
He didn't make that tackle on that play. You can look at the picture, see I'm cutting away from him. He's up in the air, already committed. Of course, he made a few tackles that game, but not on that play.
When Texas held Sims to 73 yards, it broke a 13-game streak of century-mark performances and gave Oklahoma just its second Cotton Bowl loss in 9 years. Oklahoma found itself at 9-1, ready to book a 3rd consecutive date to the Orange Bowl. Meanwhile, Nebraska had its sights on completing an undefeated season by going to the ground and a play known as the Fumble-Rooski.
We had heard about it, but we had never seen it done, especially against us. I actually saw the ball on the ground, and I went in to go cover it, and then I saw the guy pick the ball up and go. But I was so far inside the line that I couldn't get back out. Nobody thought that was coming. They needed some kind of trick to stay in the game with us.
And Nebraska was strong. They would actually predict to win the championship that year. #1 defense in the country that year. I was sitting on the sideline because we was doing the kicking game, so I wasn't involved in that. He asked me one question, and he looked at me and said, you think you really got one more good one in you? I said, well, Coach, I've saved the best for the last. So we go out and beat Nebraska, and I think it's still a record to the day. So I ran for 247 yards. He cared so much about me, even to this day. You know, he's the same way, not just me. You talk to 10 of his players, basically 9 of them run through a fire for him.
Sims' performance capped a 17-14 win over the Cornhuskers and sent the Sooners back to the Orange Bowl to face Florida State.
Captain Warren will call the toss.
Tails.
He said tails, and that's what it is. He wins the toss.
We'll take that ball.
You want the football?
We want the football.
When it came time for the game with unbeaten and 4th-ranked Florida State, the team that had every advantage going into the contest, the Sooners got serious. It was time to show again the difference between Oklahoma football and other football on New Year's night in Miami.
Thanks to Bud Hebert's 3 interceptions, Oklahoma's trip to the Orange Bowl was a walk at the beach, beating Florida State 24-7. The team left Miami victorious, while Coach Switzer stepped into a new decade and a new era of college football. Over 10 seasons, Oklahoma amassed 102 victories, 13 losses, and just 3 ties. The Big 8 championships were aptly named, as Oklahoma claimed all but 2 of the titles en route to 7 bowl victories. Coach Switzer brought 2 national championships back to Norman and watched his players win 39 All-American citations. and 1 Heisman Trophy.
So the 80s have begun for Oklahoma football, built on the strong foundation of the 1970s. A decade worth remembering, the decade of the Sooners.
So that a certain amount of cockiness and that self-confidence, that isn't bad, is it?
Well, that isn't. You know, when you back it up and do what we've done and do it better than anyone else has done, you know, I don't think that's cockiness. I think it's attitude, excellence, pride, to be the best and know you're the best and be able to prove it is a little different than being just cocky, going out and getting knocked out in the first round.
And that's what you're looking for when you recruit a boy?
You bet. We've got to have that type of athlete at Oklahoma.
Okay, good luck in the 80s, Barry.
Thank you. Let's do it again, Howard.
Okay, great.
Do it together.
All righty, thank you.
The terrific success of the Oklahoma program continued to grow along with the stadium as the seating capacity increased to more than 75,000. Rockers Van Halen, the Doobie Brothers, and Pat Benatar christened the new renovated Memorial Stadium with the first ever concert of its type, Rocklahoma. The 1980 season brought its own stars to the stadium, beginning with a young quarterback at Stanford named John Elway.
Elway to throw on first down, looks for the end zone, throws complete, touchdown, and Stanford has moved quickly on 3 plays, 60 yards for a touchdown. So the Sooners will see a 20-game winning string here at home come to an end and a current 8-game victory string, and now it's simply back to the drawing board and back to getting ready for Big 8 play next week.
A motivated Oklahoma team took its frustrations to Boulder, Colorado the following week. A familiar face graced the opposite sideline as Coach Fairbanks had returned to the college game to coach the Buffaloes. 2 offensive minds combined for a mile-high 124 points and 6 NCAA records. Oklahoma's breathtaking total offensive figure was 875 yards, with 758 of those on the ground.
99-yard touchdown, returned by Jerome Ledbetter. Jiminy Christmas, I can't believe it. It is incredible.
Unfortunately, the Sooners couldn't carry the momentum back with them to the State Fair of Texas, dropping the Texas game by a touchdown. Oklahoma pushed through the next 5 games of the season with wins, setting up another Big 8 championship showdown with the Big Red.
We go up there to play, and on every marquee of every restaurant, on every marquee of every hotel, it said, Switzer loves tacos, he loves Tex-Mex. Let's send him where he can get a lot of El Paso. You know, so it was a theme in the paper we got there. It was a theme on every marquee. As we drove from the airport to our hotel, that's all you could see on the side of the road, and we're all laughing and giggling about that. So I go to the studio that night to do a shot for Lee Allen Smith back to NBC at WKY in Oklahoma City, and a live shot, and my shot is about 9 o'clock. And I finish it about 9:30, 9:40, and I walk out, and Dick Jana is standing there. He's a Lincoln, Nebraska guy, a media guy, and he does the Bob Devaney show and the Osborne show, and he's standing there. He says, Switzer, why don't you come on Bob's show? I said, Bob Devaney got a show? And he said, yeah, he does it live. He comes in here about 10 minutes show time, and he does his show on that set over there. And I saw this set all set up. I wondered whose show was going to be done. Well, I said, well, let me tell you something. The only way I'll do it is if you don't say one word, and I'll come out when I want to. I'll get my right cue. I'll select it when I'll come out. But Dick, if you let him know, I'm out the back door. You won't see me on the show. He said, I promise you, I'll not say a word to Bob.
Hope to give it to Barry Switzer. In case Barry didn't get to go to the Orange Bowl, he could eat the pineapple instead of the tamales that they served down there in El Paso.
Well, Ray,
really, that was the thing.
Thanks very much for being here. I guess we pulled out all... Whoa, wait a minute here. I guess he's
Bob?
in person here.
Hey, oh, goddamn Barry.
Hey, I appreciate the pineapple, but I've got a couple of tacos for you, Bob.
Oh, God. Hey, one of the greatest coaches in the country, and it's great to be here with us here.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
And
I'll tell you, wherever we go, we're well fed.
Lincoln, Nebraska. And no Oklahoma team in the past decade has been as big an underdog going into a football game as this one. The experts agreed with the Nebraska fans there was no way OU could win. Not even Santa Claus gave the 10-point underdogs from Oklahoma a chance. On a 2nd and goal from the 1, Rhymes scored the touchdown that would beat Nebraska for the 9th time in the last 10 games. The Husker fans were stunned.
Hey, I want to say something, man. We got a game next week. We got to back up everything we said. And I want to know one thing. Are there any good Mexican restaurants in Miami?
Coach Switzer's team finished off Oklahoma State before heading to a 4th straight Orange Bowl Classic, this one against Florida State. Facing the number 2 ranked defense in the country and trailing 17-10 with over just 2 minutes to play, J.C. Watts went to the air looking for some Sooner magic.
The football game could be on the line with this play. J.C. rolls out, man is open. Oklahoma takes the lead as he hits Morris Malora, his tight end. What a great, great drive. What a football game this is.
When the 1981 season arrived, expectations in the Sooner State had risen back to the top. Entering the second game of the season, ranked number 2 in the country, Coach Switzer packed his bags for a trip to number 1 ranked Southern California. Just 3 points separated the two teams, with only a few seconds remaining, and the Coliseum played host to an instant classic.
Third down. This may be it. Frazier, he's open, running for the corner, throws it, touchdown! For Cornwell, he redeemed himself.
Following the heartbreaking loss, OU couldn't find the win column in its next 2 matches, and Switzer had a losing record for the first time in his career. Losing to Texas dropped Oklahoma out of the AP poll for the first time in 158 weeks. Missouri and Nebraska piled on the Sooners as well, setting the season record at 7-4-1. Across the state, the booming oil industry began to collapse, and a 4-loss season raised the outside pressure on the head coach. Switzer's 15-year ride atop the Sooner schooner had vaulted him into legendary status, but tenure doesn't exist in big-time college football.
He was at his best when things were not doing as well. He never had a woe is me or a poor attitude about being down.
After dropping 2 of the first 3 games of 1982, it was time for a change. Switzer understood the value of switching offenses at the right time and relocated the I formation in Mississippi.
So Coach Switzer calls me to see if I would go down with Lucius Selman, who was on the staff at that time, to help recruit Marcus. And I said, well, sure, I'll go down there. And we go to Philadelphia, Mississippi, sorry about like Hooks, Texas, not a big town. So I'm looking around for a running back, and here come this guy, 6'2", 6'3", 230. I said, well, have you seen Marcus, the running back? He said, I'm Marcus. I said, you gotta be kidding. I'm thinking he's a tackle or a tight end in high school, and here this guy's 6'3", 230, running a 4.3 40. I'm like, freak of nature, unreal.
The switch brought a much-needed win against Iowa State, although calls for Switzer's ouster rang out before the next game against Texas.
Dupree got around the right side and raced 63 yards for his first collegiate touchdown. The marvelous one from Philadelphia, Mississippi, was on his way to a 96-yard rushing day and was beginning to display the form that made him the most sought-after high school recruit in the nation a year ago.
The win at the Cotton Bowl sparked a 7-game winning streak that sent the Sooners to the Fiesta Bowl, facing the nation's toughest run defense in Arizona State. Dupree rushed for 239 yards, 2 more than any team gained on the Sun Devils all season. Dupree's dominance vaulted Oklahoma to the number 2 preseason ranking for 1983. But rumors swirled the star back wasn't buying into the hype. It didn't take long for high expectations to take a hit. In only the 2nd game of the season, Ohio State came to Norman looking to exact revenge for the 1977 Heartbreaker, authored largely by Uwe von Schamann. The 6th-ranked Buckeyes knocked Oklahoma out of the number 2 ranking with a 24-14 triumph. It appeared that OU had quickly recovered the following week against Tulsa. Seeking Switzer's 100th head coaching victory, the Sooners led 28-0 at halftime. But a sloppy second half opened the door for the Golden Hurricane to respond with 18 unanswered points. And the head coach was anything but festive after his milestone win.
In my 17 years of coaching, this second half was the worst 30 minutes of football that has ever been played by a team I've coached.
2 weeks later, Oklahoma suffered one big loss on the field, a 28-16 setback at the hands of rival Texas, and another off the field when super sophomore Marcus Dupree vanished. With Jimmy Johnson's Oklahoma State team waiting in Stillwater, Oklahoma's football monster all of a sudden looked a lot less ferocious.
That was a weird game. You know, we weren't very good and they weren't very good either, but that's a week after Marcus Dupree had walked off and left us. Well, you know, obviously going into the season, he was the guy. So we had to make some adjustments. But I don't think anybody had a great deal of confidence that we could be a real good football team.
The whole week was filled. In fact, I had to call a press conference on the Tuesday after the announcement had been made that Marcus had left the team. And Barry came out of his office and said, here, I'm trying to get ready for OSU and I've got to answer questions about a guy who's not even here anymore. And he did the press conference, but that whole week was just a jumble of people wanting answers about Marcus Dupree, and we had people all over campus. It wasn't the kind of week you really want to get ready to play a rival like OSU.
We got behind significantly in that ball game. You know, it looked like we just didn't show up, basically.
And it was a crazy game. And I remember that, you know, hey, I'd rather get beat by Texas than Oklahoma State, because you got to live with them. I mean, it was one of those games where you're like, you know, I cannot believe that we're going to get beat by the Aggies. I mean, it hurt that much.
After halftime in the beginning of the third quarter, we were down 20-3. And Myron Roderick called down to his security and says, get that staff off the field, because the band was playing and everybody could hear the band and Boomer Sooner and Oklahoma and everything. And it made him mad. He didn't want us playing. This argument went on for the entire third quarter. And finally I just said, look, if you want us off this floor, you're going to have to bodily remove us from this stadium. Well, they did. And they came down to get us, and an army came at us. And I said, just 1 minute. And I got up on the ladder, and knowing that he was the reason we were getting kicked out was because the band was playing, I told the kids, I says, I want you to crank up. I don't want you to stop playing until we're ahead. And out of the stadium we went.
The band never quit playing Boomer Sooner all the fourth quarter. All the fourth quarter, it was continuous. We'd given the ball away. We'd given it them field position. We knew they couldn't move and all this, but we gave them the ball game. They were ahead 20-0. Well, we eke our way back in the ball game by making big plays on them. Derek Shepard jukes them, takes it to the house. Safety runs over each other, and we go to the house. They go to the house with it.
We had scored and pulled to within 1 or 2 points, and there was like 2.5 minutes, I think, or something left on the clock, and they sent onside kick group out. And then they got to talking on the bench, and during the rest of the timeout, they decided that we'd go ahead and kick away. The defense had begun to play pretty well. We could stop them, or we'd get a chance to get a field goal, but they forgot to tell the kicker. And he kicked an onside kick and just drilled one of the Oklahoma State players. The ball came right back to whoever was covering, and we recovered and made a couple of first downs and kicked the field goal as time ran out. And, you know, you just were elated and relieved and everything else, but you also you felt like you'd stolen one.
Right after the game, a TV announcer, first question he asked is, well, what are you going to do about Marcus Dupree? And Barry hit the roof. He said, you've just seen one of the finest comebacks in our history, and you want to ask about somebody who's not even here.
When he stepped in the field, he was the best player we had. And I'd had guys that had been there 4 or 5 years, and he was better than they were. And when he stepped in the huddle as the starter, all those guys that took 3 or 4 years to make the team, they look at me and they look at him and they think that he has to do and pay the price like they do. So it was my job to get on his ass when he didn't push himself like the rest of them pushed themselves. I probably should have pulled him aside and told him, I'm going to be tougher on you than I would be my own son. I've got to do it because of all these players look to me, and these coaches look to me to not give you any slack, and because you aren't paying the price that they paid to play and stay at getting this huddle. What he lacked was mental toughness. He had great physical toughness. He was 6'3", 230, could run a 9.500. He could bench press 400 pounds coming out of high school. He had more physical attributes than any player that's 18 years old ever stepped on this university, and I'm talking about Adrian Peterson and anybody. He had it all. He was a total package except one thing. He wasn't mentally tough. He wasn't willing to pay the price.
The remarkable comeback helped Oklahoma finish the season at 8-4, but it did little to calm a Sooner following that had built its expectations on the program's impressive history.
We had followed Bud Wilkinson and what he had done, 47 straight, 3 national championships. And there was just this demand to be good. And the 3 years where Barry slipped off a little bit in 81, 82, and 83, where he lost 3 or 4 games, there were calls for maybe we ought to change, maybe we ought to change. And he had a rollover contract, and one year the Regents didn't roll it over. So that's just and we were winning, but not just dominating people like we did. And I can't tell you how much the media, the fans, I think that the tension of winning is just hangs over you. It really does. You know, something was happening every day that reminded you that, hey, this is a business. It's not a sport, it's a business, and you gotta win. Gotta win.
Over the previous 3 seasons, Oklahoma had suffered more defeats than it had experienced in the previous 11 years combined. However, when 1984 arrived, Oklahoma was poised to score a victory that changed the landscape of college football.
It was very interesting because there were a lot of schools that had never been on television. You could only be on twice, but Oklahoma was on twice every year, and a lot of schools weren't. So the existing situation had some benefits for the super elite schools, the big schools, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, Southern Cal, Alabama, those were on all the time. But the smaller conferences, and I think he recognized, very, very smart about this stuff, and I think he recognized that they lose an edge and that parity would come out of it. But I think he also recognized that for the future of the program over the years, that we had to free up these rights.
Mr. Mayor, we certainly do appreciate you spending your time with us here on the New News. Your reaction to the Supreme Court's ruling today?
Well, we're most gratified, of course, that the Supreme Court saw it our way. This was a long, hard fight.
What do you think?
We started, gosh, back in September of 1981 and started fighting them and fought them every step of the way. And it was really wonderful that the Supreme Court saw it our way and that the universities do have the right to control their own destiny.
What kind of recourse does the NCAA have now?
Well, not much. I suppose they could try to change their plan or do something else, but I think that the real merits of the case were decided, and I think that the universities now will have the right to operate pretty much as college basketball has and to be on national television or regional television or local as they choose.
1984 had already been a good year by the time the football team reported to Norman. Oklahoma gymnast Bart Connor had been brilliant in Los Angeles alongside basketball standout Wayman Tisdale, as both won gold medals for Team USA in the Summer Olympics. On the field, Oklahomans had replaced their hopes for a championship with demands. Barry Switzer understood the situation and had spent part of the offseason adding a young assistant coach and planning for the implementation of a new offense called the Flexbone.
Well, Dave, I think it's an approach like a little of old and a little of new. We're going to go back and run the option that got Oklahoma to #1 in the country for so many years in the mid to late 70s, and we're going to add a little flair of the passing game and some shifting and motion to it. So we're going to go back to what we've done best and then try to flavor it a little bit, probably.
It's a different type of wishbone. We kind of call it the scatter bone here because we do scatter people out of different places.
The move reflected a change in Oklahoma's strategy, aiming for points and yards through the air rather than on the ground. Nevertheless, Switzer understood that the path to the Big 8 championship still depended largely on his defense.
People said, well, are we going to be any better next year? I said, you're damn right we will be. So we'll be really good. I said, even though we were losing 2 first-round picks on defense in Shipp and Benson, I said, we will really be good on defense, and we'll be better than we are this year, which we were. Led the nation #1 defense because we were redshirting Dante Jones, Brian Bosworth, Troy Johnson, Kevin Murphy that year, and Darrell Reed. People don't know how good those last 3 are. They know the other 2 stood up. Dante Jones and Bosworth were All-American. Kevin Murphy was too. But Reed and Troy Johnson was as good as they were. And Osborne told me, he says, the reason we couldn't beat y'all, he said, we couldn't ever get outside your ends. We couldn't block your ends. They could contain us on the perimeter.
For the first time in the 1980s, Oklahoma won its first 4 games of the season and counted Stanford and Pittsburgh among its victims as it clawed back to the top 5 national ranking.
Defense, defense did a super job. That's a fine defensive effort out there.
The brisk start was highlighted by Steve Sewell's brilliant outing against Kansas State, when he became the first OU player to total 100 yards in both receiving and rushing in the same game. The early stages of the season also showcased a deep roster. With the rash of injuries, the Sooners had 9 freshmen on the field in their victory over Baylor. For the first time since 1979, both #3 ranked Oklahoma and #1 ranked Texas entered the Cotton Bowl undefeated. The rain-soaked Cotton Bowl field slowed Oklahoma's offense, and Texas had established a 10-0 lead at halftime. Behind senior quarterback Danny Bradley, Oklahoma rallied to claim a 15-10 lead by the 4th quarter, but the stormy nature of the day was far from over.
You always remember those defining moments that changed the whole outcome of the game. And I remember the OU-Texas game. Texas had drove the ball down, and we had to keep them out from scoring. I think it was late in the 4th quarter. But it was first and goal on the goal line. And it was rainy. It was just, that's what you call football, man. It was down and dirty. They tried to run the ball inside, dive right, toss sweeps. We ended up holding 4 downs. And for me, that was one of the biggest moments and series of plays I've ever played in because it was so much on the line. I mean, if we let them score, we may lose that game. We were stellar. I mean, that was one of the most tremendous goal line stands I've ever been involved with.
The Longhorns gave the ball back, but Oklahoma couldn't move. Switzer's call for an intentional safety left Texas with the final chance to win the game.
And there was a lot of elements in the game that if we had instant replay, we could go back and forth and say we would have won that game 3 or 4 times over.
Throw the ball in the end zone. Stansbury intercepts right there. And they got 2 officials calling him out of bounds.
I can't believe this again.
You know what? And if that's and let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you right here on television. If that is a Big 8 official that made that call there, he's not going to call another game for Oklahoma. I'm a blackball.
I'm sure many people have seen that on video or film way too much. And it's obviously Stansbury had possession of the ball. But the thing that could have avoided that is another missed call a few plays earlier. Texas fumbled, and we got the ball. There was some indecision, and it was awarded to Texas. I don't know whether they indicated there had been a whistle blow or whether he was down or what.
When he gets drilled, but Miliazzo right there, 42.
Boom! Look, that
I'm
ball
seeing the
is
ball
loose right there.
Yeah, sure it is.
But it's clearly a fumble. I mean, as you watched the game, you felt that way, and seeing the film later, of course, there's no question.
The controversial finish set the stage for more heartbreak when the Sooners faced Kansas 2 weeks later. With Danny Bradley injured, Switzer made the difficult decision to remove the red shirt from talented Henrietta freshman Troy Aikman. But the highly decorated newcomer and his offense sputtered, completing just 2 of 14 passes and the Sooners suffered their first loss of the campaign, 28-11. Less than 24 hours later, the team faced adversity again, an adversity of a more serious kind.
There was a single car accident involving Keith Stanberry and Andre Johnson, our starting cornerback and strong safety, and they were very fortunate to be alive. Their parents, the family's been contacted. Andre Johnson broke both legs. Stanberry crushed his left leg, and it took him an hour to cut him out of the car. And things like this, when you realize this tragedy occurring, makes football insignificant. It really does.
People just think, well, it's just a couple players, but these two guys were part of an integral part of our family. You know, one was a freshman, another was a senior that bought into what we were doing, and it crushed us.
Their absence was an emotional loss for the team and a void on the roster. Rallying behind their teammates and with Bradley back at quarterback, the Sooners fought through the next two games to meet #1 Nebraska in Lincoln. The Cornhuskers boasted a 27-game winning streak and the nation's best rushing offense, averaging 329 yards per game. It was truly a matchup of best on best, as Oklahoma brought the nation's best rushing defense to town, looking to shut down the Huskers' vaunted I formation.
I remember when we were standing there on the Nebraska Cornhusker turf, and Coach Gibbs made it very poignant comment to his ring. If you want one of these, you have to win here.
They know what's at stake. They're #1 in the nation. They failed in Miami on conversion. They're going to go for it here. 4th and goal from the 1. Sundberg, the quarterback. Pitch outside. Jeff Smith. He didn't get there. Fumbles the football. Oklahoma takes over.
The defense led the #2 ranked Sooners back to Norman for a matchup with surprising Oklahoma State, which had ascended to the #3 position in the polls. Playing for the Big 8 championship and a berth in the Orange Bowl, it was the offense that kicked into high gear.
Posting a 24-14 win over the Oklahoma State Cowboys. The Sooners are on their way to Miami.
You know what? '84, we got beat. We got beat by the Huskies, Washington Huskies, in the Orange Bowl. We may have had an opportunity to win the national championship, but it's one of those games where we didn't take care. We weren't. I don't think coaching-wise or player-wise, we just wasn't. We didn't take it serious.
Thought we had the game won and we didn't. You know, that was a tremendous mistake for the players, the coaches. It was a letdown for the university. So we made sure that the following year you weren't going to see that repeated.
I mean, we didn't take care of business. So the '84 year, we knew that we didn't like that taste in our mouth. But I think that really propelled us and motivated us for the upcoming season.
The 1985 schedule revealed how Oklahoma had become somewhat of a victim of its own success. ABC was certain that the Sooners' opener against SMU would have national implications, so the network moved the game to the very end of the season. That meant the opener would move all the way back to September 28th, and it would take the team on the road to meet Lou Holtz's Minnesota Golden Gophers. With a star-studded defense returning, most of the preseason focus was on the quarterback position. Troy Aikman had little experience, so it was anticipated that the defense would carry much of the load, at least through the early stages of the season. That proved to be the case at Minnesota. With 5 OU starters out due to injury, the Sooners escaped with a 13-7 win, leaving Holtz to call Oklahoma's defense the finest he had ever seen.
Well, that's a big compliment coming from a coach like Lou Holtz. But everyone talks about different styles of offenses, defenses that are ran now and then. But really, I don't think it wouldn't have mattered what type of offense we played. I think we had a collection of players that were good role players. Because you see, when you have a good defensive line and you need to get pressure on the quarterback and get him off his mark, cause disruption, then we're able to do that.
Wow. You know anything about the superheroes? Batman, Aquaman, Flash. Well, I feel like I had all those guys on the field with me. I remember my defensive back coach, Bobby Proctor, saying, "Ricky Dixon, you're not making any plays." I said, "Well, Coach, can't nothing get through." Well, if can't nothing get through, I can't make a play.
I think people were overwhelmed by our speed and our size and how well we were coached. We technique-wise, I think that we were probably the most well-coached and disciplined teams there was, and that just made us even better. And plus, we had a tenacious attitude that we were going to make sure we were going to leave our mark once we left Oklahoma.
The defense continued its domination in limiting Kansas State to 6 points and Texas to 7. The Longhorns' offense had averaged more than 450 yards per game, but mustered only 70 against the Sooners.
Every 11 down defense put in the greatest defensive performance that's ever been on that. On defense, every guy that played defense gets a game ball.
Following the Texas game, Oklahoma set its sights on one of the latest home openers in school history, an October 19th blockbuster against Miami.
Now just think, Troy Aikman, pro-style quarterback, Keith Jackson tight end. So sometimes people criticize Barry for not being in the changing with the era. He was well aware of a new era, and the University of Miami came to town throwing the football. So it was a passing attack against a passing attack. And when Troy went down, we could no longer move the ball. I mean, Jamel eventually came in, but, you know, we was more of an I team. But after 2 weeks of preparation, after Troy broke his leg, the ball got back rolling. But before then, you know, we was all stunned. Like, wow, Troy is down.
And I guess that was a blessing in disguise for both of those guys. You talk about Jamel Holloway and then Troy, obviously he went on, and you know what his career has been, a Pro Football Hall of Famer. And Jamel, I mean, he was right for that job. Felt bad for Troy, but on the flip side of that, you know, Jamel was able to come in and lead our team.
I wasn't nervous. I didn't have time to be nervous because as soon as he went down, I had to get ready to go in. And Eric Pope just told me it's just like practice. He was offensive guard, senior. It's just like practice. Let's just do like we're doing in practice and you'll be all right. And so I did it to my best ability, even though we lost.
With pressure mounting on several fronts and the prospects of a freshman quarterback, Barry Switzer searched for answers. And finally, he turned to a reliable old friend, the wishbone.
I am encouraged, man. I am encouraged by our offense. I tell you, I really am. We took the football and we moved the football on. Mistakes kept us from controlling the football. I'm encouraged by the football team. Mel did a heck of a job, went out there, took them 74 yards, made some things happen in our wishbone offense.
Maybe the guys who were seniors at that particular time said, wow, we're going back to the wishbone because that's what they saw. I was witnessing Troy Aikman in the switch of the new era. You know, I'm young, so I come in, we throwing the football, and then now all of a sudden we go back to the wishbone. I remember seeing it as a kid now, don't get me wrong, I seen it work, but now I'm at the University of Oklahoma. I hadn't really seen Jamel do anything.
My first pass was a fake bootleg, fake the bootleg left, sprint out right, and I hit Derek Shepard for a touchdown pass, my first touchdown pass.
Jamel Holloway was only 3 years old when Coach Switzer first implemented the wishbone formation at Oklahoma. With the 59-point outburst against Iowa State, it seemed that perhaps Holloway had been born for the moment.
Everybody has their time and their moments, and we had our time and our moment, and it was time to, it wasn't no time to roll over. It was time to turn it up, and as you well know, we rushed for 500-something yards. Our defense was great, so we knew if we ever got down, we knew that our defense can hold them. All we had to do was go score.
Led by coordinator Gary Gibbs, the Oklahoma defense shut down its next 3 opponents. Kansas, Missouri, and Colorado all failed to score touchdowns, while Holloway ran wild, totaling 158 points. He was particularly explosive against the Tigers when he ran for 156 yards and passed for 168 more. In each of the 3 games, Oklahoma's offense gained more than 500 yards, a first since 1974, the first national championship season for Oklahoma under Coach Switzer. A shutout the following week against Colorado set up the annual match against Nebraska, and the Big Red sported the #2 national ranking. With Oklahoma rolling, it was Keith Jackson who carried the day.
Nebraska never changes. In the past, they always brought their strong safety to our strong side. And so we went double tight to the short side of the field, but the wide side of the field was wide open, the side that we're going to run the reverse to. And so they overload to that side. And so when they think that we're going to run the outside option, everybody shifts. So now we have the advantage when they shift. Our backside is stronger than their side. And just to see a graceful handoff to Keith, I mean, because he bumps, he blocks, and then he just spent back around and came and got the ball. And to look at him go downfield and miss a couple of people, I mean, it's pretty to this day to look at.
The Huskers' only points of the day came on a 76-yard fumble return with only 26 seconds remaining in the game. Captain Tony Casillas led the charge as the Sooners kept the opposing offense out of the end zone for a 4th straight game. The unit had developed a swagger that demanded the nation's attention.
It was so much talent. I mean, from sideline to sideline, from position to position. Defensive line, linebackers, or Dante Jones, or Bob Ward, like I said, Tony Casillas, Tupper. We had so many different guys can lead in so many different ways. Some by example, some by voice. It was just so talented.
The unforgettable season continued at Lewis Field in Stillwater. Oklahoma defeated its Bedlam rival for 8 straight seasons. To stretch that streak to 9, the Sooners would have to beat the Cowboys and Mother Nature.
You got to give the weathermen an attaboy on that one. They had called that for about 4 days. At about game time, this front will come through, and it's going to change from rather heavy rain to just the bottom fall out of the temperature, and they were right on.
The weather conditions that set up for the Ice Bowl game, the OUSU game in 1985, were pretty typical for winter in Oklahoma, and we do get winter systems quite often in the last week and into December. So it wasn't anything extremely unusual, but what we had was a lot of cold air, which is always setting up there to the north of Oklahoma during that period, and we had a storm system out to the west of Oklahoma, and those moved into Oklahoma at the same time, met, and that's when we got all our frozen precipitation. And you know, fans were warned that day by the National Weather Service that the temperatures are going to start dropping and they're not going to stop, and that's exactly what occurred.
We left Norman, and I think it was like 50 degrees. We got to Oklahoma City, it was like 25. And then by the time we got to that highway that takes you into Stillwater, it was sleeting, and we're just trying to make it to the stadium.
I tell you what, Chuck Ninus, a Big 8 commissioner, he was now the CFA, College Football Association. He has asked us to change it from an afternoon game to a night game. Well, the weather can change drastically from an afternoon game to a night ball game, and it did. And I'm sitting there in that locker room thinking, why in the world I let him talk me into this? The game had already been over, and we'd hung half 100 of them, we'd be back home.
And rather than get out there and get soaked in that cold weather, we did much of our warm-up inside.
I went to that locker room at OSU, and I looked out, it looked like a skating rink out on Lewis Field. It was covered in ice, not snow, it was an ice storm. Ice was falling, just sleet, just raining ice. And that field was a sheet of ice out there.
So we go out there and we're like, oh my God, are you serious? We got to play in this? I mean, you know, when you start thinking that as a player, then you got some problems as far as motivation. But hey, the show goes on.
Every play, the linemen had to scrape with their cleats to get the traction, to get in their stance and their position. It was every play.
God, it was treacherous. I remember they're talking about people in the stands, and you know, Stillwater was like a high school stadium back then. And they had these metal bleachers, and there's people up there frozen to the bleachers. It was a big football game for us.
Obviously became a defensive, don't turn it over kind of game. Oklahoma State did make one run. Thurman Thomas broke a run off the own goal line to out about the 50, but we were able to hold. And other than that, it was just a matter of nailing down the 13-0 victory.
We've got the ball driving in, have it control of it. We got about 20-yard line when the game's over with, I think, and we call timeout, and Jamail comes over to the sidelines, and he looks up at me and he says, "Coach, you lied to me." I look at him and I said, "I lied to you? What the hell are you talking about, freshman?" He says, "You told me if I come to Oklahoma, I'd never have to play in games in conditions like this."
3-0 would have been enough, but I'm glad we got 13. Man, it was a great job of discipline, very few mistakes, playing field position, took the scores when we had a chance to put it in the end zone. Great job. I don't care whether you hit with a frozen foot. We got the ball away. We protected great. Did everything. Tonight you hit the field goals. Super job. You're champions, undisputed champions. The Big 8.
Oklahoma finally met Southern Methodist on December 7th. Originally expected to be a top 5 matchup, SMU's underwhelming 6-4 record left the Sooners with little chance to make another statement. The 35-13 victory sent Oklahoma back to the Orange Bowl, but as the number 3 ranked team, the Sooners would need some help to win a 6th national championship.
Interesting season, because probably out of all the years I played, that was probably the one you would maybe say was the least likely that you would win a title. There was a lot going on that year, so it was somewhat unlikely, it seemed at the time. We started running the wishbone again and somewhat caught a lot of teams by surprise because they hadn't been used to defending it. So kind of steamrolled our way through the rest of the season.
We knew what we had in the Big 8. We knew that we were going to do well. It's just the non-conference games. We figured if we go 11-1 or 10-1, then we'd be there. We could be going to the Orange Bowl. That was our annual trip. But we just couldn't let that one loss deter what your goals were. And that was to ultimately vie for the national championship.
Got to Penn State in the Orange Bowl and assumed that we weren't going to be playing for a national championship because Miami was playing Tennessee. It was kind of assumed that Miami would beat Tennessee, and they were heavily favored. So we went down to Miami. We were relaxed, had a good time, prepared for Penn State.
I didn't say anything before the ball game because if it didn't happen, it's something you don't talk about. It's something to be talked about after you achieved it, an accomplishment. So the coaches and I were aware of it. I don't know how many of the players were aware of it.
Just before the game, it became apparent that Tennessee was going to beat Miami.
Just saw the Miami-Tennessee score flash. Miami Hurricanes talking national championship, and with reason going into that Sugar Bowl game. That conversation is over now, unless they mount a miraculous comeback. This is it. This game will decide the national champion of college football.
And the winner of our game was going to be the national champion. So it was, totally in the moment situation where it was like the realization that, hey, we're going to be playing for it all tonight. And quite honestly, I think that was a good formula for us.
That was a game that they were undefeated, 11-0, and we played them and kind of dominated the game. Defenses kind of dominated, but we kicked 4 field goals. Lasher hit 4 field goals, got enough field position to do that, and late in the ball game,
he huddled us up and sit there and said, "Now listen, we're playing for a national championship. So let's go out here and finish it. Let's not make no mistakes. Let's just, we're ahead. Let's just keep on playing Sooner football, and we can be champions."
Lydell Carr, before he was ever injured, he was a great player, started for us as a freshman. He and Keith Jackson were 2 freshman starters when they came in here. They were men, they were physical, dominant men right away that could really play, were smart.
Oklahoma, that far away from the national championship. Back to the run go the Sooners.
Lydell pops one for about 65, 70 yards.
And he is going to go the distance. Lydell Carr's in standing up. And the national championship with certainty now belongs to Coach Switzer and his Sooners. 1:42 to play, and they own it.
It's a team game. It's a total team effort and team game. But I'm going to tell you something. This, personally, to me, is something I didn't talk to y'all about, and I talked to our coaches about. This ball game, I want you to listen to this. This ball game, I knew we were going to win. Because The time Bud Wilkinson became head coach, he coached 154 games. At the end of that 154 games, his record was 126, 24, and 4, and 3 national championships. Through 153 games, our record was 125, 24, 4, 2 national. Tonight, we tied Bud Wilkinson.
By all accounts, 1986 was set to bring Oklahoma its 7th national title. 8 defensive starters returned, and the backfield touted enough talent to fill the starting roster of 2 teams. Additionally, every key position on special teams returned. But most importantly, the Sooners were led by sophomore Jamel Holloway, who had just become the first quarterback to ever win a national title as a freshman. Oklahoma kicked off the '86 campaign with a 38-3 win over UCLA. After a bye week, the Schooner rolled over Minnesota 63-0. Totaling just under 500 yards, 4 Oklahoma players individually gained more rushing yards than the entire Gopher squad. The stage was set for another trip to Miami, and the team had but one goal in mind: payback.
A big game, a hostile opponent, a hostile crowd. While it's not impossible to beat OU, it is impossible to intimidate them.
Sophomore season, ranked #1, going into it. Now we got to go back down to the Orange Bowl and play Miami.
The battle between #1 and #2 brought Miami its largest crowd ever at home. The Hurricanes displayed their sportsmanship early by refusing to shake hands before the coin toss.
I loved it because I figured every time we played Miami, we had to come with our best.
The Hurricanes' passing attack was too much for the Sooners to handle, as Vinny Testaverde totaled 261 yards through the air and put himself in prime position to win the Heisman Trophy.
I want to tell you something. Defense, you are gutsy, much a son of a guns. I'll tell you what, I'm so damn proud of you. As a great effort. Bosworth taking place at the 3-yard line right at the end of the ball game, chasing all the field, whole defense. Reed, Troy Johnson, Ricky Bryan, not a player quit. I'm proud of you, man. I'm proud of you. We didn't help you enough on offense. We destructed, but you're a hell of a football team. A lot of class, a lot of character. I'm proud of you. I'd rather be here than at all. Hey, we'll be back. We got too much character, too much pride.
The deflating loss was not without its highlights, as Oklahoma's star linebacker set a school record 22 tackles. While Brian Bosworth was en route to an academic All-America award, it was the Boz that was chasing a second straight Buckus title.
I only brought like the Boz guy out only because that's the kind of guy I needed to be when I put the helmet on, step, onto the field.
He was articulate, he was ahead of his time as far as his academic work, and yet he felt he had to have this persona on the field and be called the Boz.
I needed to have that rage and that anger. I needed that focus. And I needed the Frankenstein to come out. And, I had a stage to do that because there's no rules inside the line.
Not everybody can psych themselves up for games the way you do, can they? I mean, not everybody can play your style of football.
Well, football's an individual game. You play within yourself, and then you play as a team member. I like to play that way. Like I said, that's the style of play I play.
A prideful Oklahoma team left Miami humbled and determined to put the season back on track. If the Sooners could run the table and secure another Big 8 championship, most of the nation was predicting a Sooner Hurricane rematch at the turn of the new year.
Testaverde's the best quarterback we've ever played against. His understanding of the game, his ability to scramble, they just make him the guy that makes things happen. I don't ever want to play them again.
Oklahoma's conference opener brought Kansas State to Norman. The Sooner defense held the Wildcats to 2 points, 2 yards per play, in a 56-10 Sooner victory. It was much of the same against Texas the following week. Oklahoma was a heavy favorite, and interest waned. For the first time in 20 years, ticket scalpers lost money on the fairgrounds, while Oklahoma won on the field 47-12. Through the next 5 games, only one team managed to dent the scoreboard against Oklahoma. Missouri got the worst of it, giving up 49 points before halftime. When the game ended at 77-0, it marked the largest margin of victory for an OU team since 1919, when Kingfisher College lost 157-0. The streak led Oklahoma into Colorado, where a chance at history awaited the Sooners in Boulder.
Prove to them there's still only 2 teams in this conference. There are only 2 teams, Nebraska and Oklahoma, and they ain't never going to change. Big 8 Conference. For the last 14 years, we win today. We'll have won 11 Big 8 Conference championships. Everybody reading the Southwest Conference, they talk about Texas in the last 10, 12 years has won 2 Southwest Conference. Houston 3. A&M finally won them 1 in 18 years. People don't know what it is to be champions. Oklahoma invented it. Invented winning, invented championships. They don't know what winning is. These people don't know what. These people ain't won in 10 years, 11 years.
Coach Switzer's team would step up to the challenge, shutting out the Buffaloes and capping one of the finest stretches in the school's football history. Through 5 games, the Sooners outscored their opponents by a combined count of 226-3.
If they had to play Miami again now, I think it'd be a different ball game. They have the capacity to keep getting better and better each week. It's certainly the greatest football team I've ever played against.
The final game of the regular season finds Oklahoma on the road against the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and as usually the case, the Big 8 championship is on the line. The winner of this game goes to the Orange Bowl.
Nebraska scored the first rushing touchdown against the Sooners all year. OU answered through the air. Holloway to Jackson set up the Sooners' first score. The Huskers broke the deadlock before halftime. OU was going into the locker room behind for only the second time this year. 4 minutes into the third quarter, the Huskers opened up a 10-point lead. And with 4 minutes left in the game, the Sooners found themselves still 7 points back.
Some great things happened in the fourth quarter. We had not done anything to make anybody think we were going to win. And Jamel threw the ball better than I think anybody expected him to. And of course, with Keith Jackson out there, you didn't have to throw it extremely well because he's going to catch everything, and then you couldn't tackle him.
It was time for that magic again. Not much doubt who Jamel wanted to throw to. Knowing is one thing. Stopping an All-American is something else.
And he's going down the boundary. Now, if he gets tackled, we're out of timeouts, and he knows that. And the clock is going to run out on us. But Keith steps out of bounds. Just goes on about of bounds himself, stops the clock with 6 seconds left.
Nebraska thought a victory was just a few minutes away, but Tim Lasher kicked their hopes back at least another year.
Jackson's catch secured the Big 8 title, along with Oklahoma's 600th all-time win. While the Sooners finished their season against the number 5 team in the country, Miami ended with a victory over East Carolina. The rematch the team wanted wouldn't happen, but Coach Switzer found an opportunity to avenge a loss of his own.
Coach Switzer was avid because this was his revenge to get back at the University of Arkansas.
That was really an overwhelming performance. Of course, that was the game that Bosworth had been ruled ineligible, so Deontay stepped up and just never missed a beat.
It showed America that if one Sooner goes down, the next one can step up and play just as well, given the opportunity. But he was the best cheerleader that day for us. I'm glad he got to be on the sidelines.
We were number 3, I believe, and we knew we couldn't be number 1. And we decided that we would utilize Keith Jackson a little more in the passing game, off the threat of the option, and Arkansas's defense didn't know whether they were foot or horseback.
17 starters, including Jamel Holloway, Keith Jackson, and a defense that led the country in 4 categories, returned in 1987. The Sooners were the favorite to capture the national championship that eluded them 1 season earlier. The first 4 games of the season solidified the lofty expectations when the Sooners posted victories of 69-14, 28-0, 65-0, and 56-3.
Everybody listen up. One thing. You say one word. Texas. Time to go to work. Texas.
OU vanquished Texas with 7 interceptions before a routine win over Kansas State set up the first ever night game on Owen Field, a bout with Colorado. The weekend was fraught with success for the football team and for the state. Oklahoma City leaders Lee Allen Smith and Clay Bennett officially signed a pact with the U.S. Olympic Committee to host the 1989 Olympic Sports Festival. The event would attract the world's greatest athletes and showcase the Sooner State across the nation. On the gridiron, Oklahoma rode off Kansas 71-10 as Coach Switzer's teams made it 17 straight heading into the Oklahoma State game.
And will Barry Switzer pass Bud Wilkinson as the all-time winner of Big 8 football games? Those questions to be answered today here at Oklahoma.
Everybody out, up the middle, intercepted by Oklahoma.
The 47 of the Cowboys and Holloway. Tackled by Deckard. Deckard fortunate to get an arm out, and Holloway hobbling with an ankle sprain, it appears.
I remember watching Jamel go down in that game, and it was not from a contact hit, and so I thought maybe it was a minor injury. If he came out, maybe it'd be for a play or two. And so when I got in the football game, I still kept looking over back to the sideline, anticipating for Jamel to be able to come back in the game. It wasn't until after the first series, my quarterback coach and offense coordinator, Jim Donnan, uttered the words to me, "Well, this is what you always wanted. It's your show now." Jamel's torn his ACL, he's out for the season. And I just never forget that feeling of like, oh wow, am I really ready for this?
Out of the end zone, Gundy, intercepted Oklahoma. Touchdown Sooners! Oh, mama, Troy Johnson! And that'll be the ball game. Hey, we lost Jamel. Tell him I feel bad for him. All right.
Thompson's play saved the undefeated season and made Switzer the all-time wins leader at Oklahoma, pushing him past the legendary Bud Wilkinson. The Tigers of Missouri put up the greatest fight of the season the following week. Coach Woody Wittenhofer's team was positioned for the greatest upset of the season.
My first start against Missouri that year was a rough one because of the adjustment of having the anxiety of knowing that you walk out there and you're a very key factor of the outcome of that football game from the start to finish.
The unimpressive victory dropped Oklahoma to number 2 in the polls and moved rival Nebraska into the top spot. Again, the two Big Reds were fighting for the Big 8 title and a shot at a national championship. The stage was set for another game of the century.
You come in here, then you give your respects, and then you leave with a loss.
Usually that was a clean rivalry, but that was the first time someone had actually, on either side, said something verbally to offend another team.
And Broderick Thomas and Steve Taylor came out during our warm-ups and, with the smirk on their face, saying, y'all had the keys, now we've changed the locks, this is our house.
We knew that the national championship was on the line again. So just like another big game, we're here again. We've been here before. Let's go. This is the trip to get us there.
I'll never forget Switzer walking into the huddle and pulling me out and says, "Charlie Thompson, if you play like you've practiced, you'll shock the nation this weekend."
Nebraska took the ball. They had a great quarterback and went the length of the field and went ahead 7-0. Their next 12 possessions, they went 1, 2, 3 and out.
Of course, Nebraska is known for having great line play on both sides, and we just dominated them at the point of attack, and there was no question who the better team was that day.
You know, really, that game shouldn't have been close because we took the ball on drives and took it inside their 20 and fumbled the ball away.
Oklahoma was playing very well, and maybe we were more focused on what we were saying than how we were playing.
It was a 17-7 ball game, but it was really close until Patrick Collins takes it 65 yards for a touchdown and gives us his bow. He bows in the end zone to us. I said, where'd that come from?
You could hear a pin drop in Lincoln. And that was the best moment I had as a Sooner by not playing, just to see that happen and to see that crowd just be quiet.
When the game was over, I just realized we were going back to Miami and playing the Orange Bowl.
To play against Testaverde, Steve Walsh, Michael Irvin, the Blade brothers, Brad and Highsmith. I mean, those are just names that us Sooners, we don't like those names. I mean, because they put it to us 3 years in a row.
The reality is we were, for 3 years there in a row, I think we're the two best teams in the country.
I think they had a coach in Jimmy Johnson who had spent years at Oklahoma State kind of having to deal with the wishbone. He understood how to stop it, and probably obviously always knew how to stop it, just didn't have the right type of athletes.
The wishbone is predicated on speed. You had the speed to get to the corner before the defense could. Miami got to the corner just as fast as we did, and most everybody in the conference hadn't caught up.
He goes to Miami. He's able to recruit and get those type of athletes in that program. They were a great football team, and the biggest thing between them, I say, in Nebraska, was that they had enough speed in the defensive back and the linebackers that they had to counteract what we were doing. As the game went on, and it become evident that we weren't going to win, I sat on the sideline, and I never forget thinking to myself, "Oh, it's okay. We'll be back here again."
The unfortunate end to the season capped an incredible 3-year run for the Oklahoma program. During the span, the Sooners went 33-3, while the Hurricanes proved to be the only storm the team could not weather. Coach Switzer had won 12 out of the past 15 conference titles and played for a national championship in 2 of the previous 3 seasons. Behind his leadership, the outlook for Oklahoma football again offered promise in 1988. 2 easy wins began the season and ushered in a top 5 matchup against Southern California.
We're ready to go as the 7th meeting between these 2 traditions of college football is underway. Things have not gone well for Oklahoma here in the first half. The Sooners have got to shake things up and get something going. They trail 20-0. The way Rodney Peete is performing, I'm just almost sure that we're just delaying the inevitable. Southern California already leading 20-7. Here's Thompson to throw on first down. He throws upfield, and it is intercepted at the 45. There was a mix-up. Hale back up into Oklahoma territory at the 40. Going wide, might go all the way to the 25, the 20, and Thompson caught him at the 12-yard line. Obviously, there was a mix-up, and Southern California is only 10 yards away from putting this one into the record book.
The loss in the Coliseum dashed the hopes of another title run, but still left the Sooners in a race for the Big 8 crown. Oklahoma jumped to a quick 2-0 start in the conference before putting on a rushing clinic against Kansas State. Behind an NCAA record 768 yards on the ground, the Sooners posted 70 points in another easy win. Oklahoma was still perfect in the conference when it arrived in Stillwater. The Cowboys hadn't defeated the Sooners in more than a decade, but a young running back in orange was determined to break that trend.
Barry Sanders, the Heisman Trophy frontrunner, some people say.
Every time I went and speak in Oklahoma City to a group of people, you know, Rotary Club, Kiwanis, all during this period of time, and I'd talk about all the great backs I had at Oklahoma and all. And I said, I'm not too sure Thurman Thomas and Barry Sanders aren't the best that I've ever seen. And I know Barry Sanders is probably the best running back that I've ever seen run with a football.
The pitch to Sanders, outside, he's at the 5 and he takes it to score. And there's why Barry Sanders is definitely Heisman caliber and a threat every time he touches it.
I said, I want to tell you something. And I could tell all the Aggies in the audience would scoot forward, and boy, they had a big smile on their face. But the Sooner coach talking about their two great running backs. And I said, you know what Barry Sanders and Thurman Thomas have in common? Before they could say anything, I said, they never beat my ass. They never could beat me.
Oklahoma's next win over Missouri set up the Sooners against Nebraska for the Big 8 crown.
In that game, we probably played the wishbone defensively better than I had ever seen it played. I think they ended up with maybe 120, 130 yards total in the game. And I guess I'll always remember that game because it was a cold, rainy day in Norman. And it was a day kind of built for defense. And our defense really played well that day.
That was really my first true start. They had transitioned out of the Holloway phase into the Thompson phase, and so it was important for me to try to guide the team to victory.
The Big 8 conference title is down to one play at the Sooner 48, Nebraska leading 7-3. Two wideouts to the short side of the field. Stell is in there to block for Thompson. He pulls back to throw. Now looking, can he scramble? He can't, and he is sacked, and that's going to do it at the 46-yard line.
To fall short was disappointing, very disappointing. Probably would have been a lot, certainly, even more down if I had known that'd be my last play.
The gloom of the Nebraska loss quickly turned to despair. A cold winter in Oklahoma brought chilling news to the fan base. The NCAA had discovered 20 rules violations within the program and placed the Sooners on probation. A Citrus Bowl loss to Clemson did little to soothe the wounds, and with controversy shadowing the program, the summer of 1989 brought the unimaginable.
When you first come in here, you're young men. I'm gonna let you grow. You know, as long as you respect the university, respect yourself, don't get in any trouble, you're okay. But things started happening.
The national perception of our team then was like an outlaw team.
People asked me why you recruited a guy that shot his roommate, Jerry Parks. Well, the reason I recruited him is because if I hadn't gotten him, he was going to Notre Dame or Texas A&M.
A lot of people tab me as the straw that broke the camel's back. That's tough to live with because, like I said, grew up my entire life. All I knew of OU football was Barry Switzer.
Today I'm resigning as head football coach at the University of Oklahoma, effective immediately. This is the most difficult decision I've ever had to make. But I have come to the conclusion that my resignation is in the best interest of the football program, the university, and Barry Switzer.
My leaving the University of Oklahoma was a decision that I made. I thought it was the best interest of school. I was worn out. I really was emotionally worn out and dealing with it every damn day. And Donnie didn't want me to leave. Donnie told me, he says, the only reason I'm here is because of you. And he says, you're the one that made it fun to come to work every day and work with every day. And but I called the staff in and told them that this is going to be my decision, and I would be resigning tomorrow. And that was in June the 19th of '89.
Coach Switzer ended his 16-year service as Oklahoma's head coach with 157 wins, 12 league championships, and 3 national titles. Hundreds of teammates and thousands of fans basked in one of the greatest runs in college football history as the rest of the country looked on. And with the U.S. Olympic Festival coming in August of '89, the Sooner fan base didn't have to wait long to show its appreciation.
This is the 1989 Olympic Festival opening ceremonies. I think they're saving the noisiest reaction to last.
And this is the South team. As you can hear,
and that ovation for none other than Barry Switzer.
A standing ovation, I might add, Jim.
You know, they say that, you know, you don't care how much somebody knows until you know they care.
I really don't think there's much you don't know. You know, everyone knows how caring he is and how much he loved his players and his players loved him.
I know just from the way he treated me, I was going to lay my heart out for him because I didn't want him to feel bad if we lost and stuff. And so when you love somebody like that and you want to play for that guy, you don't want to lose because you know that's not your best.
He's my friend, he's my father, then he's my coach. That's my buddy, man. I mean, I put it to you like this. If it was a brick wall in here and Coach Switzer said, Jamel, come on, we finna move this wall, I would really think that we're gonna move it 1 inch.
He loves you then, and he loves you now, and he's the same always. And anyone who's ever played for Coach Switzer won't say anything but that they love the man to death, and will always do so.
After you've played for Coach Switzer, you got a friend for life.
There's no speculating. You see what you see in him is what you get. Love him or hate him. Most people love him. If you hate him, you got some big problems because it's hard to hate a guy like that.
Well, there's very few men in your life that impact your life to a degree that mold it in a direction that is gonna be the forever. It's gonna be the standard. And he's that one guy.
He opened that door and he held it open and he never shut it to any athlete. And I think that is why all the athletes who played for him felt that way.
And he was passionate, and he was emotional, and he was fiery, but he was also very sensitive. And I think that he recognized that this was a fun ride, and let's really go and enjoy it, and he did.
His way of handling a grown man as a coach was basically the same way he handled you as a football player. You wanted to do a good job for him, you know, above and beyond your salary and all that stuff. That basically became second. You wanted to do a good job for your boss. And I worked a few jobs, and you don't run into that very often.
Coach Switzer is always will always be remembered by me as long as I live, because he was the University of Oklahoma.
His teams, his players, his coaches, they all had fun, and I know that they just had, they were serious about, winning and when they needed to be, but they genuinely had a good time.
We all had a great relationship with Barry because of his personality and the way he treated, his players with respect and with love.